Chapter 1. When Lightning Strikes Twice. The storm hit Millbrook like a fist through glass. Lila Chen pressed her face against the diner's rain-streaked window, watching the last traces of daylight disappear behind walls of churning gray clouds. The weather app on her phone had promised light showers. Instead, nature seemed intent on washing the entire mountain town off the map. "You're not seriously thinking of driving in this," said Marge, the 60-something waitress who'd been refilling. Lila's coffee cup every 20 minutes for the past 3 hours. Thunder crashed overhead, rattling the diner's windows in their frames. Lila wrapped her fingers around the warm ceramic mug, drawing what comfort she could from its heat. "I can't stay here forever." "Honey, you've been running from something. For weeks now. I can see it in your eyes. Whatever it is, it'll still be there tomorrow." The older woman wasn't wrong. Lila had been driving aimlessly through small mountain towns for nearly a month, ever since she'd discovered the truth about her engagement to Marcus. Ever since she'd walked in on him with her best friend in their shared apartment. Ever since. Her entire life had collapsed like a house of cards. But staying still felt dangerous. Staying still meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering the look on Marcus's face when she'd caught them. Not guilt, but annoyance at being interrupted. "I need to keep moving," Lila said quietly. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the forest that pressed close against the town's edges. In that brief, brilliant moment, Lila could have sworn she saw something moving between the trees. Something large and dark, running parallel to the road. The lights in the diner flickered and died. Emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, bathing everything in an eerie red glow. Marge sighed and pulled a flashlight from beneath the counter. "Well, that's just perfect. Cell towers probably went down too." Lila checked her phone. No signal. The battery was nearly dead anyway. She'd forgotten to pack her charger in her hasty escape from San Francisco. "There's a motel about 2 miles up the road," Marge offered. "If you can make it that far without hydroplaning." Through the window, Lila watched the storm rage. Rain hammered the pavement so hard it bounced back up in sheets. The wind bent trees, nearly horizontal. But something else caught her attention. Headlights weaving erratically down the main road. "Someone's in trouble," she said, standing abruptly. The headlights swerved violently, overcorrected, then disappeared entirely as the vehicle left the road. A moment later, the sound of metal meeting wood echoed even over the storm. "Jesus," Marge breathed. That sounded bad. Lila was already grabbing her jacket. As a trauma nurse, she'd seen too many accidents where minutes made the difference between life and death. Her personal problems would have to wait. "You can't go out there," Marge called, but Lila was already pushing through the door into the howling wind. The storm hit her like a physical blow. Rain soaked through her jacket in seconds, and the wind threatened to knock her sideways. She could barely see 3 feet ahead, but she forced herself forward, following the direction of the disappeared headlights. She found the truck wrapped around a massive pine tree about 50 yards off the road. The front end was completely crushed, steam rising from the destroyed engine despite the driving rain. The driver's side door hung open at an odd angle. "Hello?" she shouted over the storm. "Are you hurt?" No response. She pulled out her phone's flashlight, praying the battery would hold a little longer, and approached the wreckage. The driver's seat was empty, but she could see blood on the steering wheel and dashboard. Not a lot, but enough to suggest head trauma. Whoever had been driving was probably disoriented, possibly wandering in the storm. A branch snapped somewhere in the darkness behind her. "Hello?" she called again, turning slowly. "I'm a nurse. I can help you." The forest seemed to hold its breath. Even the storm felt muted, as if the trees themselves were listening. Lila's flashlight beam swept across the undergrowth, illuminating nothing but rain-heavy ferns and moss-covered rocks. Then she saw the eyes. They gleamed in her flashlight beam, amber gold and distinctly inhuman. Too large for a dog, too intelligent for any wild animal she knew. They watched her from perhaps 20 feet away, unblinking and entirely unafraid. A wolf. It had to be a wolf, though she'd never heard of any in this part of the mountains. The creature was massive, its dark fur matted with rain, and it studied her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "Easy," she whispered, slowly backing toward the wrecked truck. "I'm not going to hurt you." The wolf tilted its head, and for a moment, Lila could have sworn she saw something almost human in its expression. Recognition, maybe, or calculation. Lightning flashed again, and in that instant of brilliant illumination, she saw that the wolf was injured. Dark patches along its left flank that were too wet to be rain. Blood. The truck driver. The wolf could have attacked whoever, crawled out of the wreck. But as the darkness returned, she realized something that made her heart skip. The wolf wasn't looking at her like prey. It was looking at her like it knew her. Thunder crashed overhead, and when she blinked the spots from her vision, the wolf was gone. "This is insane," she muttered, but found herself moving deeper into the forest anyway. If someone was injured and lost in this storm, she couldn't just walk away. It went against everything she'd sworn as a nurse. She followed a faint trail that might have been a game path, her flashlight beam growing dimmer by the minute. The wind howled through the canopy above, sending branches creaking and groaning, like the forest was in pain. That's when she found him. He was collapsed against the base of an enormous oak tree, semi-conscious and bleeding from a gash across his forehead. Even in the dim light, she could see he was big, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and dark hair that clung wetly to his skull. His clothes were torn, and there were scratches on his arms that looked like they'd come from forcing his way through heavy underbrush. "Hey," she said, kneeling beside him. "Can you hear me?" His eyes opened, and Lila's breath caught. They were the same amber gold she'd seen watching her from the forest. The same intelligent, almost predatory gaze. Impossible. The wolf had been 20 feet away when she'd last seen it, and she'd been moving toward the truck, not deeper into the woods. There was no way this man could be connected to— "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice a low rasp that seemed to rumble from somewhere deep in his chest. "It's not safe." "You're injured," she replied, falling back on professional training, to steady herself. "I'm a nurse. Let me help you." She reached toward the cut on his forehead, but his hand shot out to catch her wrist. His grip was gentle but unbreakable, and his skin was fever-hot despite the freezing rain. "You need to leave," he said, his eyes fixed on hers with startling intensity. "Now. Before—" He never finished the sentence. His eyes rolled back, and he collapsed completely, his hand falling away from her wrist. Lila checked his pulse. Strong, but rapid, and examined his injuries as best she could in the failing light. The head wound wasn't as bad as it looked, though he'd definitely have a concussion. But the scratches on his arms were deep, and there were more on his chest beneath. His torn shirt. Some looked like they'd come from thorns or branches, but others looked distinctly like claw marks. She was still puzzling over this when her phone finally died, plunging them into complete darkness. The storm raged around them, and she was alone in the forest with an unconscious stranger who had the eyes of a wolf. In the distance, something howled. Not the wind through the trees, but something alive and wild, and calling to its own kind. And despite everything, the storm, the accident, the impossibility of the situation, Lila found herself answering that call in the most primal way possible. Every instinct she possessed screamed at her to run, but she couldn't leave him. Something deeper than professional duty kept her rooted to the spot, as if her life had been leading to this moment all along. As if this was exactly where she was, meant to be. Chapter 2. Shelter from the storm. Lila had made plenty of questionable decisions in her 28 years, but staying in a dark forest during a thunderstorm with an unconscious stranger definitely ranked in the top 3. She couldn't move him. Alone, He had to weigh at least 200 pounds of solid muscle, and leaving him here while she went for help felt like signing his death warrant. The temperature was dropping fast, and hypothermia would set in long before she could navigate back through the storm with rescue workers. "Come on," she whispered, gently shaking his shoulder. "I need you to wake up." He stirred at her touch, a soft groan escaping his lips. Even unconscious, his body seemed to radiate heat like a furnace. She pressed her palm to his forehead, checking for fever, and found his skin burning hot despite the freezing rain. His eyes snapped open at her touch, immediately alert in a way that made her pulse jump. Most people came back to consciousness, gradually after a head injury. This man went from unconscious to completely aware in the space of a heartbeat, like a predator sensing danger. "You're still here," he said, his voice rough with something that might have been pain or frustration. "You're hurt, and it's freezing. I'm not leaving you to die of exposure." She kept her voice professionally calm despite the way his golden eyes seemed to see straight through her. "Can you stand? We need to get you somewhere warm and dry." He pushed himself up against the tree trunk with obvious effort, wincing as the movement pulled at his injuries. "There's a cabin about half a mile north of here, but you shouldn't..." "Shouldn't what?" "Help someone who's injured?" She stood and offered him her hand. "I'm a trauma nurse. This is literally what I do." For a moment, he just stared at her outstretched hand like it might bite him. Then, slowly, he reached up and let her help pull him to his feet. The contact sent an electric shock up her arm. His hand was massive, calloused from hard work, and so warm it made her realize how cold she'd gotten. But it was more than physical. The moment their skin touched, something inside her chest shifted, like a lock clicking into place. He felt it, too. She could see it in the way his eyes widened slightly, the sharp intake of breath that had nothing to do with his injuries. "What's your name?" she asked, trying to break the strange tension building between them. "Cade," he said after a pause, as if he'd considered lying. "Cade Morrison." "Lila Chen." She kept hold of his hand as he swayed slightly on his feet. "How's your head? Any nausea? Double vision?" "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You were unconscious for at least 10 minutes, and that gash is going to need stitches." She studied his face in the darkness, noting how the rain had washed most of the blood away but left the cut clean and visible. "Plus you're running a fever." "I don't get sick." The words came out flat, matter of fact, as if he were stating the weather. "Everyone gets sick, and head injuries can cause..." "I don't get sick," he repeated, this time with an edge that made her take a step back, "and neither do you, anymore." What's that supposed to mean? But he was already moving, threading through the trees with surprising steadiness for someone who'd been unconscious moments before. "The cabin's this way. Stay close." Lila followed, partly because she didn't have much choice, and partly because something about the way he moved fascinated her. Despite his size and his injuries, he barely made a sound as he navigated the forest floor. He seemed to know exactly where to step to avoid the worst of the undergrowth, how to duck under low branches she couldn't even see in the darkness, like he'd walked this path 1,000 times before. "How do you know where you're going?" she called, over the storm. "I know these woods." "In the dark?" "In a storm." He paused, glancing back at her with an unreadable expression. "I have good night vision." That was putting it mildly. Lila could barely see her own feet, but Cade moved through the forest like he had some kind of internal GPS. Every few minutes, he'd stop and wait for her to catch up, and she noticed he always positioned himself between her and the deeper parts of the forest, as if protecting her from something she couldn't see. "Are you from around here?" she asked during one of these pauses. "You could say that. That's not really an answer. Neither was why you're driving around alone in the middle of nowhere during a storm. Fair point." She wasn't exactly eager to share her sob story with a stranger, no matter how compelling his eyes were. "I needed to get away for a while." From what? Everything. He studied her for a long moment, and she had the unsettling feeling he could see more than just her physical appearance. Like he was reading something written in her posture, her scent, the way she held herself. Bad breakup? He asked quietly. The accuracy of his guess startled her. Among other things. He hurt you. It wasn't a question, and the way he said it made something dangerous flash in his golden eyes. For a moment, Lila glimpsed something predatory beneath his human facade, something that made her primitive brain whisper warnings. Not physically, she said quickly. He wasn't who I thought he was. Cade's expression softened slightly. That's the worst kind of hurt. There was something in his voice, a note of personal experience that made her wonder what kind of betrayal he'd suffered. But before she could ask, he was moving again, leading her deeper into the forest. The cabin appeared out of the darkness, like something from a fairy tale. It was small, but well built, with a covered porch and windows that glowed with warm yellow light. Smoke rose from the chimney, and Lila could smell wood burning even over the rain. Someone's home, she said. It's mine. She stopped walking. Yours? But your truck. I wasn't driving the truck. He climbed the porch steps and held the door open for her. That was someone else. Then what were you doing in the forest during a storm? For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said very quietly, running. The inside of the cabin was everything the outside promised. Warm, cozy, and completely at odds with the wild storm raging outside. A fire crackled in a stone fireplace, casting dancing shadows on walls lined with bookshelves. The furniture was simple but well made, and everything smelled faintly of pine and something else she couldn't identify. Something wild and clean and distinctly masculine. Sit, Cade said, gesturing toward the couch near the fire. I'll get you some dry clothes. You're the one who needs medical attention, she protested, but he was already disappearing into what she assumed was a bedroom. Alone for the first time since finding him, Lila took the opportunity to really look around. The cabin was clearly lived in but meticulously clean. No photographs on the walls or mantel, she noticed. No personal touches that might give away who Cade Morrison really was. He returned with a flannel shirt and a pair of sweatpants that would be huge on her. Plus, a thick towel. Bathroom's through there, he said, nodding toward a door off the main room. There's a first aid kit under the sink. The first aid kit is for you, not me. You're soaked and shivering. Change first, then we'll argue about who needs medical. Attention. He had a point. Her clothes were plastered to her body, and she was starting to shake from the cold. She took the dry clothes and headed for the bathroom, acutely aware of his eyes following her across the room. The bathroom was as neat as the rest of the cabin, but she noticed several things that made her pause. The medicine cabinet was well stocked, with antibiotics and pain medication. Prescription strength, not over the counter. The shower had multiple bottles of expensive shampoo and body wash, but they all smelled like the same wild, clean scent she'd noticed earlier. And in the trash can, she glimpsed torn fabric that looked suspiciously like the remains of a shirt with claw marks. When she emerged from the bathroom, wearing his clothes and feeling slightly more human, she found Cade sitting on the couch with his head in his hands. He'd taken off his torn shirt, revealing a chest and shoulders that belonged in a fitness magazine, but what caught her attention were the scratches she'd noticed earlier. They were already healing. The cuts that had been deep and bleeding an hour ago were now pink and shallow, like week-old wounds instead of fresh injuries. The gash on his forehead had stopped bleeding entirely. That's not possible, she said. He looked up, following her gaze to his chest. For a moment, something like panic flashed across his features. Then his expression went carefully blank. I heal fast. Nobody heals that fast. I do. She approached slowly, her nurse's training warring with her growing sense that nothing about this situation was normal. Cade, what aren't you telling me? Nothing you need to know. I think I deserve some answers. The truck accident, finding you in the forest, the way you knew exactly where to go in the dark. She gestured toward his rapidly healing wounds. This. He stood abruptly, putting distance between them. You should leave. First thing in the morning, you should get in your car and drive as far away from here as possible. Why? Because I'm not safe to be around. The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside the cabin, the only sound was the crackling of the fire and the thundering of Lila's heart. I don't believe that, she said quietly. You should. If you were dangerous, you would have hurt me already. Instead, you've done nothing but try to protect me. She took a step closer, ignoring the way every muscle in his body tensed. What are you running from, Cade? For a long moment, he just looked at her. In the firelight, his eyes seemed to glow with their own inner light, and she could see the war playing out across his features. The desire to tell her the truth, battling with the need to keep her safe. Finally, he spoke. His voice, so low she had to strain to hear it. I'm not running from something. I'm running from what I am. Her hands were shaking as she backed away from the window, her mind struggling to process what she'd witnessed. But even as rational thought tried to reject what she'd seen, something deeper, something primal and ancient, whispered that she'd always known. She'd always been different. Always felt like she was living in the wrong skin, playing a role that didn't quite fit. Downstairs, Cade's voice rose again, and this time she caught every word. She doesn't know what she is yet. I won't let you force the change before she's ready. The change. As if summoned by his words, something shifted inside her chest. A warmth that had nothing to do with the cabin's fire spread through her veins, and for a moment, her vision sharpened to impossible clarity. She could see every detail of the forest below, could smell the rain and pine, and something else, something wild and clean and achingly familiar. The scent of pack, the scent of home, the scent of exactly what she was meant to be. Chapter 3. The space between truth and lies. The words settled between them like stones dropped into still water, creating ripples that changed everything. Lila studied Cade's face in the firelight, searching for clues to a riddle she didn't fully understand. What you are, she repeated slowly. That's a strange way to put it. He turned away from her, moving to the window where he stood with his back rigid, hands braced against the frame. You should get some sleep. The storm will pass by morning. Don't do that. Do what? Shut me out. She moved closer, ignoring the warning tension in his shoulders. You brought me here, Cade. You could have left me at the diner, or told me to call for help and disappeared back into the forest. But you didn't. That was a mistake. Was it? She reached out, her fingertips barely grazing his bare shoulder, before he flinched away from her touch. Even that brief contact sent heat racing through her veins. Because it doesn't feel like a mistake. He spun around, and she saw something wild and desperate in his golden eyes. You don't understand what you're saying? Then explain it to me. I can't. Can't or won't. The question hung in the air between them. Outside, lightning illuminated the cabin windows, followed by a crash of thunder that seemed to shake the very foundations. But inside, the silence stretched taut as a wire. There are things about me, he said finally, his voice carefully controlled, that would make you run if you knew them. Try me. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. You're stubborn. Part of my charm. She settled onto the couch, pulling, her legs up under her and making it clear she wasn't going anywhere. Besides, where would I run to? My car's back at the diner, the storm's not letting up, And I'm wearing your clothes. Something flickered across his expression. Amusement, maybe, or resignation. He moved away from the window but didn't sit down, instead beginning to pace the small space like a caged animal. I've lived in these mountains my whole life, he said, not looking at her. My family, we're not like other people. Different. How? We have responsibilities. Obligations to protect certain things, certain territories. He stopped pacing, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. And sometimes those responsibilities require sacrifices. Lila watched him carefully, noting the tension in every line of his body, the way he seemed to be choosing each word with surgical precision. What kind of sacrifices? The kind that make it impossible to have a normal life. The kind that make it dangerous to get close to people who don't understand what they're getting into. She was quiet for a moment, processing his words. Is that why you were running tonight? Because of these responsibilities? Among other things. And the truck that crashed, was that connected to whatever you're running from? His jaw tightened. The less you know, the safer you'll be. Stop protecting me from information and start trusting me with it. She stood up, moving closer despite the way every muscle in his body screamed danger. I'm not some fragile flower who's going to fall apart at the first sign of trouble. You don't know what you're asking. Then show me. The words escaped before she could stop them, carrying more weight than she'd intended. They weren't just about his secrets anymore. They were about the pull she felt toward him, the way her pulse quickened when he looked at her, the sense that meeting him had changed something fundamental inside her. Cade went very still. Lila. I know this is crazy, she said quickly, before she could lose her nerve. I know I barely know you, and I know there's something you're not telling me. But I also know that I've felt more like myself in the past few hours than I have in months, maybe years. That's the adrenaline talking. No, it's not. She took another step closer, close enough now that she could see the flecks of gold in his amber eyes, could feel the heat radiating from his skin. I spent 3 years with someone who made me feel small and invisible, someone who made me question my own judgment about everything. But with you, with me, what? With you, I feel awake. The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Cade's breathing had changed, becoming deeper, more controlled, like he was fighting some internal battle. You can't feel that way about me, he said quietly. Too late. Lila, whatever you are, whatever you're running from, it doesn't change the fact that you saved me tonight. You could have let me freeze in that forest, but you didn't. You brought me somewhere safe and warm, and you've done nothing but try to protect me. You don't understand the danger. Then help me understand. She reached up, her palm settling against his chest, right over his heart. The contact made him suck in a sharp breath, and she could feel his pulse hammering against her hand. Trust me enough to tell me the truth. For a moment she thought he might. His hand came up to cover hers, and she saw something break behind his eyes, a wall coming down, a decision being made. Then a howl echoed through the forest, long and mournful, and definitely not human. Cade went rigid under her touch, his head snapping toward the window. Damn it. What was that? Something I was hoping wouldn't find me. He gently removed her hand from his chest, but his fingers lingered against hers for a moment longer than necessary. They've been tracking me. They? Another. Howell answered the first, closer this time. Then another, from a different direction. They were surrounded. You need to go upstairs, Cade said, his voice taking on a tone of absolute authority. There's a bedroom at the end of the hall. Lock the door and don't come out until I tell you. It's safe. I'm not leaving you alone with whatever's out there. You don't have a choice. He was already moving, pulling on a fresh shirt from a pile of laundry by the fireplace. "And whatever you hear, whatever you think you see, don't open that door. Promise me." The howling was getting closer, more frequent. It sounded like a pack of wolves. But something about the rhythm, the almost conversational quality of the calls, made her skin crawl. "Cade, what's happening?" He paused at the door, his hand on the knob, and looked back at her. In the firelight, his eyes seemed to glow with an inner flame that had nothing to do with the reflection of the flames. "The truth you wanted?" he said, quietly. "It's about to come looking for us." Before she could respond, he was gone, stepping out into the storm and closing the door firmly behind him. She heard the heavy sound of the deadbolt sliding into place, locking her in, not them out. Lila stood frozen for a moment, listening to the howls growing closer and the sound of Cade's boots on the porch steps. Every instinct screamed at her to follow him, to help somehow. But his words echoed in her mind. "Whatever you hear, whatever you think you see, don't open that door." She made it halfway up the stairs before the first snarl split the night. It was unlike anything she'd ever heard. Too deep for a dog, too savage for any domestic animal. It was followed by Cade's voice, raised in what sounded like a warning or challenge, though she couldn't make out the words over the storm. From the upstairs window, she had a partial view of the clearing around the cabin. Lightning flashed, illuminating, shapes moving between the trees, large four-legged shadows that circled the cabin with predatory patience. Then she saw Cade. He stood in the center of the clearing, arms spread wide, facing down what had to be at least 6 wolves. They were massive, bigger than any wolves she'd seen in nature documentaries, and they moved with an intelligence that made her blood run cold. Lightning flashed again, and for just a moment, she could have sworn she saw something impossible. The largest of the wolves, a gray-black beast with silver markings, reared back on its hind legs, and its shape seemed to blur and shift in the brief illumination. When the darkness returned, there was a man standing where the wolf had been. Lila pressed her face against the glass, heart hammering, telling herself she'd imagined it, the storm, the stress, the impossibility of the entire situation. It was making her see things that weren't there. But then Cade's voice carried up through the storm, clear and unmistakable. "I told you I needed more time, Marcus." Marcus. The name hit her like a physical blow. It couldn't be the same Marcus, her Marcus. The odds were astronomical, the coincidence too impossible to believe. But as another flash of lightning illuminated the clearing, she saw the man who had taken the wolf's place, tall, lean, with the kind of aristocratic features that had first attracted her 3 years ago. It was him. Her ex-fiancé was standing in a forest clearing, having apparently transformed from a wolf, confronting the man she was rapidly falling for. And suddenly, every strange thing that had happened tonight began to make a terrible kind of sense. The accident that wasn't an accident. Cade's rapid healing and uncanny night vision. His warnings about what he was. About the danger of being near him. The way her own body had responded to his presence, as if recognizing something her mind couldn't process. She thought about Marcus's unexplained absences during their relationship, his insistence on spending time alone in remote places, the way he sometimes seemed to know things he couldn't possibly know. She thought about the dreams she'd been having since leaving San Francisco, dreams of running through forests, of hunting, of a wildness she'd never felt in her waking life. And she thought about Cade's words. "I don't get sick, and neither do you anymore." Marcus's smile widened. "You remember that, do you? Good. Then you remember how it felt. The rush of power, the sense of finally being complete. That's your true nature calling, darling. And it's only going to get stronger." He was right. And they all knew it. Even now, Watching the wolves in the clearing, Lila could feel something shifting inside her. A restlessness that was becoming harder to ignore. A hunger that had nothing to do with food. The change is coming whether you want it or not, Marcus continued. The question is whether you'll accept it gracefully, or fight it until it destroys you. I've seen both, Lila. Trust me when I say you want guidance for what's ahead. She has guidance, Cade said firmly. Mine. From a lone wolf with no pack, no territory, no resources. What happens when she needs help you can't provide? What happens when the hunger becomes too much and she loses control? That won't happen. Won't it? Marcus gestured to the other wolves, who stepped forward as one. These are her people, Cade, her true family. You're asking her to choose isolation over belonging. For the first time since this confrontation began, Cade seemed uncertain. Lila could see it in the way he held himself, the flicker of doubt that crossed his features, and that doubt cut through her like a blade. Because regardless of what she was becoming, regardless of the supernatural politics she didn't understand, one thing was crystal clear. Cade had risked everything to protect her. He'd stood against an entire pack, fought their leader, claimed her as his own, all without asking for anything in return. The least she could do was stand with him. Before she could second-guess herself, Lila was moving, down the stairs, through the cabin, her hand on the door handle before rational thought could stop her. The moment she stepped outside, everything changed. The storm hit her like a living thing, but instead of the cold shock she expected, it felt like coming alive. Every raindrop was distinct against her skin, every scent in the wind sharp and identifiable. She could smell the pack's tension, Cade's protective fury, Marcus's satisfied anticipation, and underneath it all, something else, something wild and free and entirely her own. There she is, Marcus said softly. Beautiful, isn't she? Even fighting the change. All eyes turned to her, and Lila felt the weight of their attention like a physical force. But it was Cade's gaze that anchored her, golden eyes full of concern and something that might have been pride. Lila, he said quietly. You should go. Back inside. No. She stepped off the porch, bare feet finding the muddy ground. If you're all going to discuss my future, I should have a say in it. Marcus laughed, spoken like a true alpha female. I always knew you had it in you. I'm not yours anymore, Marcus. The words came out with more confidence than she felt. I stopped being yours the moment I walked out that door in San Francisco. Did you? He tilted his head, studying her with predatory interest. Because your body says otherwise. I can smell the change on you, getting stronger by the minute. And once it happens, once you shift for the first time, you'll understand that you were never meant for the human world. He was right about the change. She could feel it now, a pressure building under her skin like steam in a kettle. But he was wrong about what it meant. Maybe I wasn't meant for the human world, she said, taking another step into the clearing. But that doesn't mean I belong to you. She looked at Cade, saw him tense as if expecting her to run. Instead, she moved toward him, closing the distance between them with steady, deliberate steps. I belong with him, she said, her hand finding his. Whatever that means, whatever the consequences. I choose Cade. The words hung in the storm-charged air like a vow, and deep in the forest, something howled in response, wild and joyous and free. Chapter 4. Blood Moon. Rising Lila's knees gave out, and she sank onto the bedroom floor as the world tilted around her. Everything she thought she knew about herself, about Marcus, about the strange pull she'd felt toward Cade. It was all connected, by invisible threads she was only now beginning to see. Downstairs, voices carried through the storm. Marcus's cultured tones, sharp with authority. She belongs to our pack, Cade. You know the laws. She belongs to no one. Cade's voice was steady, Dangerous. And she's under my protection. Your protection? Marcus laughed, the sound carrying a cruel edge Lila remembered all too well. You're a lone wolf, Morrison. You have no pack, no territory, no claim to anything. Least of all her. I have claim enough. The words sent a shiver through Lila that had nothing to do with the cold. Even not understanding the full context, she could hear the challenge in Cade's voice, the line being drawn in the sand. Do you? Another voice joined the conversation. Female, with a slight accent. Because it looks to me like you've been hiding from your responsibilities for months, letting an unmated female run around completely unaware of what she is. That's dangerous, Cade. For all of us. Unmated female. The clinical term made Lila's skin crawl, but it also triggered something deep in her memory. Dreams she'd dismissed as stress-induced nonsense suddenly took on new meaning. Dreams of running through moonlit forests, of hunting, of a restless energy that never quite found release. Dreams that had started 3 years ago, right around the time she'd met Marcus. She pressed her ear to the floor, straining to hear more. The council sent us to retrieve her. The female voice continued. If you interfere, the council can go to hell. Cade cut her off. She doesn't even know what she is yet. Forcing a change on someone who isn't ready could kill her. Marcus finished. Yes, we're aware of the risks, but leaving her ignorant is a bigger risk to our kind. She's been having the dreams, hasn't she? The hunger, the restlessness that no amount of human activity can satisfy? Lila's breath caught. How could he possibly know about that? About the way she'd been feeling for months? Like there was something clawing at the inside of her skin, trying to get out. I can smell it on her, Marcus continued, his voice dropping to something almost intimate. The change wants to happen. Her body is ready, even if her mind isn't. And the longer we wait, the more dangerous it becomes. She's not ready, Cade repeated, but there was something strained in his voice now. Doubt, maybe. Or fear. Ready or not, it's going to happen soon. The question is whether it happens safely, with pack support, or violently, when her control finally snaps. A pause. You know what happened to Sarah Mitchell when they waited too long. The name hit Cade like a physical blow. Even from upstairs, Lila could see the way his shoulders tensed, the way his hands clenched into fists. That was different, he said quietly. Was it? Another late bloomer, another protective male who thought he knew better than the council. She tore through half a family before they could put her down. Put her down. The casual brutality of the phrase made Lila's stomach turn. This isn't the same situation, Cade insisted, isn't it? Marcus took a step closer, and even from her hiding place, Lila could sense the predatory menace in the movement. Tell me, Morrison, when's the last time she slept through the night? When's the last time she ate meat without feeling like she could devour the entire animal? When's the last time she looked in a mirror and didn't feel like she was wearing someone else's face? Each question hit like a hammer blow because each one was devastatingly accurate. The insomnia that had plagued her for months, the way she'd started ordering steaks bloody rare, then barely cooked at all. The strange disconnection she'd felt from her own reflection, as if the woman looking back at her was a stranger wearing her skin. You've been watching her, Cade said, and there was murder in his voice. Of course we have. She's been one of ours since the moment I bit her. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Lila's hand flew to her neck, fingers finding the small scar she'd carried for 3 years. The scar Marcus had given her during what she'd thought was particularly passionate lovemaking. The scar that had never quite healed properly, that sometimes ached during storms or full moons. The bite. Mark, you son of a bitch, Cade snarled. You infected her without her consent. I gave her a gift, Marcus replied coolly. One she'll thank me for once she accepts what she is. And when she rejected you? When she broke your engagement? You just let her walk away? I gave her space to come to terms with the changes. But her time is up. The council has been patient, but there are rules, Cade. Unmated females don't get to run around the human world indefinitely. It's too dangerous. Lila closed her eyes, pieces of her shattered life rearranging themselves into a new, terrible pattern. The strange dreams that had started after Marcus bit her. The growing restlessness, the sense that nothing in her human life satisfied her anymore. Even her decision to leave San Francisco after catching him with her friend. Had that been her choice, or some kind of supernatural compulsion? She chose to leave, she heard Cade say, as if reading her thoughts. That should tell you something about what she wants. She chose to run because she was scared and confused. Natural responses for someone going through the change without proper guidance. Marcus's voice took on a patronizing tone that made Lila want to punch something. I should have handled things differently, I admit. But I was young, and I thought love would be enough to ease the transition. Love? The word came out of Cade like a curse. You manipulated her, used her, turned her into something she never asked to become. And what have you done? Hidden her away, let her suffer through the symptoms without understanding what's happening. To her, at least I'm offering her a place where she belongs. She belongs wherever she chooses to belong. Does she? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've claimed her already. I can smell your scent all over her. The temperature in the clearing seemed to drop 10 degrees. When Cade spoke again, his voice was barely human. If you have a problem with that, we can settle it right now. Gladly. The word was barely out of Marcus's mouth before the sound of shifting filled the air. The wet, organic noise of bones rearranging, of muscle and sinew reshaping itself. Lila pressed herself against the window, transfixed despite her terror. In the lightning-lit clearing below, 2 massive wolves circled each other with deadly intent. One was the gray-black beast she'd seen before. Marcus, she realized with sick certainty. The other was slightly smaller but broader through the chest, with dark fur marked by silver streaks. Cade. They moved with liquid grace, testing each other's defenses, looking for an opening. The other wolves had pulled back, forming a loose circle around the combatants, but their attention was focused outward, as if watching for other threats. This was pack law, Lila realized. Trial by combat, with her as the prize. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, she found herself leaning forward, every nerve ending alive with anticipation. When Cade feinted left and Marcus lunged, she felt her own muscles tense in response. When Marcus's claws raked across Cade's shoulder, she felt the echo of pain in her own body, and when Cade caught Marcus's throat in his jaws, something wild and fierce rose in her chest, something that wanted to throw back its head and howl victory to the storm-dark sky. That was when she knew, with absolute certainty, that everything they'd said was true. She wasn't human. Maybe she never had been. And the dreams she'd been having weren't dreams at all. They were memories of who she was meant to be. The realization should have sent her into panic, should have made her question her sanity. Instead, it felt like coming home, like finally understanding why she'd always felt like she was living someone else's life. Below, Cade released Marcus with what looked like supreme effort. The gray wolf staggered back, blood matting his fur, but he was still standing. Still. Alive. It's over, Marcus, Cade said, having shifted back to human form so quickly Lila barely caught the transition. Take your pack and leave. Marcus shifted as well, naked and bleeding but unbroken. This isn't over. The council can take their laws and shove them. She's mine now. Cade's voice carried an absolute authority that made something deep in Lila's chest purr with satisfaction. Anyone who wants to dispute that is welcome to try. For a long moment, the two men stared at each other. Then Marcus smiled, cold and calculating. Yours? Are you sure about that, Morrison? Because she hasn't exactly consented to this arrangement. And consent matters, doesn't it? He looked up toward the cabin, toward the window where Lila was watching. Hello, Lila. I know you're up there. Ice flooded her veins. How could he possibly know where she was? Come down here, Marcus called, his voice carrying easily through the storm. It's time you learned the truth about what you are, what we are. Don't, Cade said sharply. But he was looking up at her window too, and she could see the conflict in his expression. The desire to protect her warring with the knowledge that she deserved to make her own choices. I'm not going anywhere, Lila called down, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. You lost the right to make demands when you bit me without my permission. Threat? Lila's voice rose. I just fought to protect all of you. How am I a threat? Because power always threatens those who already have it, Cade said quietly. And you, love, have more raw power than most wolves develop in a lifetime. The endearment hit her like a physical touch, warm and possessive and right. But it also highlighted the choice she was facing. Cade's protection versus Marcus's resources. Safety versus power. Love versus politics. There's another option, Elena said suddenly. One neither of these territorial males is going to suggest. All eyes turned to her. She stood straighter, meeting their gazes with calm confidence. You could come with me. Join the Guardians. The Guardians? Lila had never heard the term. Elite wolves who work directly for the Council. We investigate supernatural crimes, deal with rogues, maintain the peace between packs. Elena's expression was serious. We're always looking for wolves with your kind of natural ability. Absolutely not, Cade snarled. It's not your choice, Elena replied coolly. It's hers. Marcus looked furious. You can't just recruit her. She's... What? Your property? His? Elena gestured between them dismissively. She's a free adult with considerable power and the right to make her own decisions. The three options hung in the air between them. Marcus's pack, with its resources and political connections. Cade's protection, offered with love but limited by his isolation. Or Elena's proposal, a chance to use her newfound abilities in service of something larger than herself. But as Lila looked around at the aftermath of the battle, at the rogues they'd killed and the blood soaking into the muddy ground, she realized there was a fourth option nobody had mentioned. She could walk away from all of them. The thought came with a surge of the same fierce independence that had driven her to leave San Francisco. She'd spent 3 years letting Marcus make decisions for her, and now everyone wanted to do the same thing, just with different agendas. I need time to think, she said finally. Time is something we don't have much of, Marcus warned. The Council can wait. The words came out with more authority than she'd known she possessed. I just learned I'm not human 20 minutes ago. I think I'm entitled to at least one night to process before making life-altering decisions. For a moment, none of them spoke. Then Cade stepped forward, offering her his hand. Come inside, he said quietly. The rest of this can wait until morning. Lila looked at his outstretched hand, then at Marcus's frustrated expression, then at Elena's calculating gaze. 3 paths stretching out before her, each leading to a different version of herself. But for tonight, she only wanted one thing: to be with the man who'd risked everything to protect her, who'd seen her transform into something inhuman and called her incredible. She took Cade's hand, letting him lead her toward the cabin. Behind them, she could hear Marcus and Elena beginning a heated discussion about protocol and council law, but their voices faded as the cabin door closed behind her. For the first time since this nightmare began, she was alone with Cade. No pack, politics, no ancient laws, no one trying to claim or recruit or protect her. Just the two of them, and the electric tension that had been building between them all night. The tension that was about to reach its breaking point. Chapter 5. The breaking point. The howl that answered Lila's declaration didn't come from any of the wolves surrounding them. It came from deep within the forest, primal and ancient, carrying a resonance that seemed to vibrate in her very bones. Several of Marcus's pack members shifted nervously, ears flattened against their skulls. "What was that?" Lila whispered, her hand tightening in Cade's. His expression had gone grim. "Something that shouldn't be here. Marcus, you need to take your pack and leave. Now." But Marcus was staring into the darkness beyond the clearing, his nostrils flaring. "That's not possible. We sealed the territory." "Sealed it from what?" Lila asked. But neither man answered her. They were both focused on the forest, every muscle tense with alertness. The howl came again, closer this time, and it was joined by others. Not the controlled, purposeful calls of a pack, but something wilder, hungrier. "Rogues," the female wolf who'd spoken earlier said, shifting back to human form. She was tall and athletic, with short-cropped auburn hair and scars that marked her as a fighter. At least 6 of them. Rogues? Lila looked between the faces around her, all of which had gone pale. "Wolves who've lost their pack bonds," Cade explained, his voice tight. "They go feral eventually, lose their humanity entirely. And they're attracted to strong emotions," Marcus added, shooting Cade a hostile look. "Especially during a challenge. Your little display may have just painted a target on all our backs." "My display?" Cade snarled. "You're the one who brought a pack into neutral territory." "This isn't neutral territory anymore," the auburn-haired woman said sharply. "The moment you claimed her, you made it yours, which means defending it is your responsibility." Another howl split the night, close enough now that Lila could hear the madness in it. The sound made something deep in her chest recoil with instinctive fear. "Everyone inside," Cade ordered. "Now." "I don't take orders from you," Marcus snapped, but even he was backing toward the cabin. "You will if you want to live through the night," Cade replied. "Those aren't pack wolves out there. They're predators, and they won't distinguish between enemies and allies." As if summoned by his words, shapes began emerging from the tree line. Lila caught glimpses of them in the lightning flashes. Wolves, but wrong somehow. Too thin, too desperate, their eyes reflecting not intelligence but pure feral hunger. "How many?" Cade asked the auburn-haired woman. 8, maybe 10. She was pulling clothes from a bag one of the other pack members had carried. "More coming. From the east." "Elena's right," Marcus said reluctantly. "We need to work together on this." Cade nodded curtly. "Elena, take 2 others and cover the back of the cabin. Marcus, you and your remaining wolves take the west side. I'll handle the front." "What about me?" Lila asked. "You stay inside where it's safe." "Like hell I do." The vehemence in her own voice surprised her. "These things are here because of me, aren't they? Because of whatever's happening to me?" "Lila, don't." She pulled her hand free from his, taking a step back. "I'm tired of being protected from information. Tired of everyone making decisions about my life without consulting me. If I'm part of this world now, then I'm part of this fight." "You don't know how to fight," Marcus said, though there was something like approval in his voice. "Then teach me, quickly." The first rogue hit the clearing's edge with no warning, launching itself directly at Elena. She shifted mid-dodge, her human form blurring into a tawny wolf that met the attacker in mid-air. They hit the ground in a snarling tangle of claws and fangs. Chaos erupted. More rogues poured from the forest, their movements erratic and desperate. Unlike the controlled pack wolves, these creatures fought with no strategy, no coordination, just savage hunger and the desperate need to tear apart anything that moved. Cade shifted so fast, Lila barely saw the transition. His human form replaced, by the powerful dark wolf she'd watched fight Marcus. He threw himself between her and an approaching rogue, the impact of their collision shaking the ground. Around the clearing, the night filled with snarls and the wet sounds of violence. Lila pressed herself against the cabin wall, fighting the urge to run inside and hide. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, but something else, something deeper and fiercer, wanted to join the fight. The pressure under her skin was building again, stronger now, fed by adrenaline and the scent of blood in the air. Her vision sharpened until she could see individual raindrops, her hearing amplified until she could distinguish each heartbeat in the melee. A rogue broke through the defensive line, heading straight for her with foam-flecked jaws and wild eyes. Lila had a split second to decide. Run, or trust the thing growing inside her. She chose trust. The change hit her like lightning, burning through every nerve ending in her body. But instead of pain, there was a fierce joy, a sense of finally coming home to herself. Her human form dissolved and reformed, bones extending, muscles reshaping, skin giving way to fur. When the transformation completed, she was no longer Lila Chen, trauma nurse from San Francisco. She was something else entirely, sleek and powerful, with senses that could track every scent in the wind and reflexes that moved faster than thought. The rogue reached her just as the change finished, and she met it with claws and fangs that knew exactly what to do. They rolled across the muddy ground, and for a moment, she was overwhelmed by the rogue's size and desperation. But then training she didn't remember having kicked in, and she found the opening she needed. The rogue went limp beneath her, and she released it with a snarl of satisfaction. Around the clearing, the fighting was winding down. Most of the rogues were dead or fled, and the survivors were melting back into the forest. Lila stood over her fallen opponent, chest heaving, feeling more alive than she ever had in her human form. She was magnificent. Golden brown fur with darker markings along her back, smaller than the male wolves but built for speed and agility. And her eyes, when she caught her reflection in a puddle, blazed with the same amber fire as Cade's. Lila. The voice in her head was Cade's, though his wolf form was still locked in combat with two rogues near the tree line. The mental connection was intimate, immediate, and completely natural. "I'm okay," she responded, surprised by how easily the telepathic communication came. "You're incredible." The warmth in his mental voice made something deep in her chest purr with satisfaction. But the moment was interrupted by Marcus, who had shifted back to human form and was stalking toward her. "Well," he said, his voice carrying a complex mix of emotions. "That was unexpected." Lila shifted back to human form, the transition easier, this time, as if her body was remembering how to flow between shapes. She was naked, she realized, but felt no shame about it. Nudity was apparently a normal consequence of shifting. "Here." Elena appeared beside her, offering a blanket from the cabin. "First shift is always disorienting." "It wasn't disorienting," Lila said, accepting the blanket and wrapping it around herself. "It felt right." Of course it did. Marcus stepped closer, and she could see something predatory in his gaze. "You're a natural. I knew you would be." "Stay back," Cade growled, having shifted back to human form as well. He positioned himself between Lila and Marcus, and she could feel the tension radiating from him. "Relax, Morrison. I'm not going to try anything." Marcus raised his hands in mock surrender, though I have to say, watching her take down that rogue was impressive. Lila looked back at the body of the creature she'd killed, expecting to feel horror or guilt. Instead, she felt nothing but grim satisfaction. It had been trying to hurt people under her protection. She'd stopped it. End of story. The change came naturally to her, Elena observed, studying Lila with professional interest. No struggle, no pain, That's rare for someone her age. What does that mean? Lila asked. It means you're not just any werewolf, Marcus said, his voice taking on the lecturing tone she remembered from their relationship. You're powerful, potentially alpha level, given the right training. I don't want to be an alpha. Want doesn't factor into it, darling. Power is what it is. Marcus glanced at Cade, and something calculated flickered in his expression. Though I suppose that depends on who's doing the training. The implication was clear. Join his pack, and he'd help her develop her abilities. Stay with Cade, and she'd be limited by his lone wolf status. She doesn't need a pack to reach her potential, Cade said firmly. Doesn't she? Tell me, Morrison, what do you know about training alpha females? What experience do you have with helping someone navigate the political complexities of pack dynamics? Marcus's smile was sharp. Because, like it or not, she's going to be dealing with both. The council will want to meet her, especially after tonight's display. The council can what? Ignore her? Marcus laughed. You killed rogues tonight, Lila. In your first shift, you took down a feral wolf twice your size. That kind of power doesn't go unnoticed. Lila looked between the two men, feeling like a bone being fought over by rival dogs. What exactly is the council? The governing body for our kind, Elena answered when neither man spoke. They maintain order, settle disputes, enforce the laws that keep us hidden from humans. And they're going to want to test her, Marcus continued. See exactly how powerful she is, determine what kind of threat she might pose to the existing order. I love you too. The admission seemed to surprise him as much as her. I have since the moment you knelt beside me in that forest and refused to leave me behind. The confession hung between them, fragile and powerful. Outside, the storm was beginning to weaken. But inside the cabin, a different kind of tempest was building. Cade's hands moved to the blanket wrapped around her, his fingers tracing the edge where it met her skin. Are you sure? He asked again. Because if we do this, we bond. I know. She reached up to touch his face, marveling at the way he leaned into her palm. I want that. I want you. The last of his restraint crumbled. He swept her up in his arms, carrying her toward the bedroom with supernatural grace. But just as they reached the stairs, voices outside grew louder, more urgent. Council representative will be here by dawn, Elena was saying. If she's not prepared. She's not ready for an evaluation, Marcus interrupted. The transformation was too recent, too traumatic. Cade paused on the stairs, his jaw clenching. They want to test you. Tonight. Test me how? The council sends evaluators when a new wolf displays exceptional power. They assess potential threats, determine placement within pack hierarchies. His arms tightened around her protectively. It's not pleasant. Fear curled in Lila's stomach, but it was overwhelmed by a surge of defiant anger. I just learned what I am. I just had my first shift, and they want to test me like some kind of laboratory specimen? It's protocol, Cade said grimly. And refusing would be seen as an act of rebellion. Maybe that's exactly what it should be. He studied her face, seeing something there that made his eyes flash with approval. You're not afraid of them. Should I be? Most wolves are terrified of council evaluation. It can determine the entire course of your supernatural life. Then maybe it's time the council learned that not all wolves are most wolves. The fierce pride in his expression made her heart race. You really are magnificent. So are you. She reached up to kiss him again, pouring all her newfound certainty into the contact. Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever tests they want to run, we face it together, he finished. Together. Outside, Elena's voice rose again, and this time Lila caught the words that made her blood run cold. Already dispatched a containment team. If she fails the evaluation, they have orders. To neutralize the threat. Neutralize. The same euphemism Marcus had used about Sarah Mitchell, the wolf who'd been put down when her change went wrong. Cade heard it too, his entire body going rigid. "Over my dead body." "That can be arranged," came a new voice from outside. Cold, authoritative, and completely unfamiliar. Through the cabin windows, Lila could see new shapes moving in the clearing. More wolves, but these moved with military precision, surrounding the cabin in a matter of seconds. "The council's early," Elena said, and for the first time since meeting her, the other woman sounded worried. Cade set Lila down gently, but kept, his hands on her waist. "Whatever happens next, remember that you have choices. You don't have to prove anything to them." "What if they try to force me?" His smile was sharp, predatory. "Then they'll learn why lone wolves survive when pack wolves don't." Outside, the new voice spoke again. "Send out the female. The council will see her now." Lila looked into Cade's golden eyes, seeing her own determination reflected there. "Ready? With you, I'm ready for anything." Together, they walked down the stairs toward whatever judgment awaited them. But as they reached the door, Lila realized something that filled her with fierce satisfaction. She wasn't the same woman who'd walked into that diner hours ago. That woman had been running from her problems, hiding from her true nature, letting others define her worth. This woman, this wolf, was ready to fight for her right to choose her own destiny, and God help anyone who tried to stand in her way. Chapter 6. What Lies Beneath. The cabin felt different now, smaller, more intimate, charged with an energy that had nothing to do with the storm still raging outside. Lila stood in the middle of the living room, suddenly hyper-aware of everything. The way Cade's eyes tracked her movements, the scent of rain and pine and something uniquely him, the sound of her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. Her senses were still heightened from the shift, everything sharper and more intense. She could hear conversations outside, Marcus and Elena arguing about protocol, the other pack members discussing patrol routes, but their voices seemed distant, unimportant compared to the man standing 3 feet away, watching her with golden eyes that seemed to see straight through her soul. "How do you feel?" he asked quietly. The question was loaded with meaning. How did she feel about the transformation? About killing a rogue wolf with her bare hands? About discovering that everything she'd believed about herself was a lie? "Different," she said, then shook her head. "No, that's not right. I feel like myself for the first time in years." Cade's expression softened. "The wolf was always part of you. Marcus's bite just awakened it. But I was human before. I had a normal life, a normal job." "Did you?" He moved closer and she caught that wild, clean scent again, stronger now. "Tell me honestly, Lila, did you ever feel like that life fit you? Like you were living as the person you were meant to be?" The question hit uncomfortably close to home. She thought about her apartment in San Francisco, sterile and cold despite her attempts to make it welcoming. Her job at the hospital, which she'd been good at but never passionate about. Her relationship with Marcus, which had felt like playing a role in someone else's story. "No," she admitted, "I always felt like I was wearing a costume that didn't quite fit." "Because you were." Cade reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a strand of wet hair from her face. "You were suppressing your true nature, trying to force yourself into a shape that could never contain what you really are." His touch sent electricity through her skin, and she found herself leaning into it despite everything that had happened. "What am I really?" Powerful, independent, fierce. His thumb traced along her cheekbone and she shivered at the contact. "You took down a rogue wolf in your first shift, Lila. Do you understand how extraordinary that is?" Marcus said. "Marcus says a lot of things." Cade's voice hardened. most of them designed to serve his own interests. And you? What do your words serve? The question made him pause, his hand stilling against her face. The truth, which is that you're remarkable, and you deserve better than being treated like a prize to be won. Outside, Marcus's voice rose sharply, though she couldn't make out the words. Elena responded with equal heat, and Lila wondered what they were arguing about now. Probably her future, her choices, her value to their respective causes. They're fighting about me again, she said. Let them fight. Cade's hand moved to cup the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in her hair. You don't belong to any of them. You never did. Do I belong to you? The words slipped out before she could stop them, raw and honest, and loaded with meaning. Cade went very still, his eyes searching her face. Do you want to? He asked quietly. The question hung between them like a bridge she could either cross or burn. On one side lay safety, independence, the careful distance she'd maintained between herself and real intimacy since Marcus had betrayed her. On the other lay something terrifying and magnificent, a connection that felt like destiny and choice wrapped into one. I don't know what that means in your world, she said. Being claimed, belonging to someone. Is it like marriage? Like ownership? Neither. His voice was rough, intimate. It's like recognition. Finding the person who completes the parts of yourself you didn't know were missing. That sounds like fate. Maybe it is. His other hand came up to frame her face, and she could feel the slight tremor in his fingers. I've been alone for a long time, Lila. By choice, because I thought it was safer. Better for everyone if I didn't form attachments. What changed? You. The word was simple, absolute. From the moment I caught your scent in that forest, everything changed. You could have run when you saw me bleeding. You could have left me there and gone back to your human life, but you didn't. I couldn't leave someone hurt and alone. Most people could. Most people would have. His thumb stroked across her cheekbones, and she felt herself melting into his touch. But you're not most people. You're... What? Mine, he finished, the word barely a whisper. If you want to be. The possessiveness in his voice should have alarmed her. After Marcus's manipulations, his assumption that he could make decisions for her, she should be running from any man who spoke about ownership. But this felt different. Cade wasn't trying to control her. He was offering himself to her, wholly and completely. Show me, she said. The words seemed to unlock something in him. His hands tightened on her face, and suddenly he was kissing her with a desperation that stole her breath. It wasn't gentle or tentative. It was hungry, claiming full of 3 years' worth of suppressed need and desire. Lila melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt as she kissed him back with equal fervor. Every nerve ending came alive under his touch, heightened by her new supernatural senses until she could taste his desire, smell his arousal, feel the thundering of his heart against her chest. But it was more than physical. The moment their lips met, something clicked into place deep in her chest, a recognition that went beyond attraction or chemistry. This was right. This was home. This was the missing piece she'd been searching for without knowing it. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Cade rested his forehead against hers. Are you sure? He asked. Because once this happens, once we bond, there's no going back. You'll be mine, and I'll be yours, completely. Is that what you want? More than I've ever wanted anything. His honesty was devastating. But I need to know you're choosing this freely, not because you're scared or overwhelmed or... She silenced him with another kiss, softer this time, but no less intense. I'm choosing you, she said against his lips. Not because I'm scared, not because I need protection, because you're the first person who's ever made me feel like I could be exactly who I am." Something shifted in his expression, relief and desire, and something deeper, more profound. "Lila, I love you," she said, the words coming easier than she'd expected. "I know it's crazy. I know we barely know each other, but then who does?" Thorne's smile was razor sharp. The lone wolf who claims her? The guardians who want to recruit her? Or perhaps she speaks for herself? It was a trap, and everyone present knew it. By accepting the challenge, Lila would be acknowledging the council's right to make such demands. But refusing would validate their authority just as completely. "I speak for myself," Lila said firmly. "I always have." "Excellent." Thorne gestured to her enforcers, and the largest of them stepped forward. He was massive, easily 6.5 feet tall, with the kind of build that spoke of a lifetime of violence. Scars marked his arms and face, and when he looked at her, she saw nothing but cold professionalism. "Victor has served the council for 15 years, Thorne announced. "He's never lost a sanctioned challenge." Victor began stripping off his tactical gear with methodical precision, revealing a body that was more weapon than flesh. Every muscle was defined, every movement economical and deadly. Lila watched him prepare, feeling the weight of every gaze in the clearing. This was insane. She'd had exactly one fight as a wolf, against a creature driven mad by isolation and hunger. Victor was a trained killer who'd been doing this longer than she'd known what she was. But as she began removing Cade's borrowed clothes, preparing for what might be her last fight, she felt something settle deep in her chest. A calm certainty that had nothing to do with confidence and everything to do with acceptance. She was tired of being afraid, tired of running from what she was. If this was how she died, at least she'd die as herself. Victor finished his preparations and stepped into the center of the clearing. He didn't shift to wolf form. Apparently, he thought his human shape would be sufficient to deal with her. That was his first mistake. Lila walked toward him, naked and unashamed, feeling the eyes of every supernatural creature in the mountains, fixed on her. But the only gaze that mattered was Cade's, golden and fierce, and absolutely unafraid. She was magnificent, and she was his, and she was about to show them all exactly what that meant. "Begin," Thorne commanded, and Lila smiled. Chapter 7. Trial by Fire. The clearing had transformed into something resembling a military operation. Council enforcers. She could tell them apart from Marcus's pack by their tactical precision and matching black gear, had positioned themselves at strategic points around the cabin. They moved like soldiers, not wolves, and something about their coordinated efficiency made Lila's newly awakened instincts scream warnings. At the center of it all stood a woman who radiated authority like heat from a forge, tall and severe, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a tight bun. She wore a long coat that somehow remained pristine despite the storm. When she turned toward the cabin, Lila caught sight of eyes so pale they were almost colorless, the eyes of someone who had seen too much and felt too little. "Counselor Thorne," Elena said, and Lila could hear the careful respect in her voice. "We weren't expecting you until dawn." Plans change when rogue attacks occur in populated areas. The woman's voice carried the weight of absolute authority, especially when those attacks involve an unregistered wolf displaying alpha-level capabilities. Her gaze fixed on the cabin door, and Lila felt the weight of that stare like a physical pressure against her skin. This woman knew exactly who she was, what she'd done, and probably things about Lila that she didn't know herself. "Send her out," Counselor Thorne commanded. "Now." Cade's hand found hers, his fingers intertwining with a gentle strength that steadied her racing heart. "Remember," he murmured, "you don't owe them anything. Answer their questions, but don't let them intimidate you into revealing more than you're comfortable with." What happens if I fail their test? His jaw tightened. You won't fail. But if they try anything... He didn't finish the sentence, but she could feel the barely leashed violence in his grip. Lila took a deep breath, drawing on reserves of courage she'd never known she possessed. Let's get this over with. They opened the door together, and immediately, every eye in the clearing turned toward them. The council enforcers remained motionless, but she could sense their readiness, coiled springs waiting for the slightest provocation. Marcus and his pack had clustered near the tree line, watching with the careful neutrality of predators, uncertain which side to choose. But it was Counselor Thorne who commanded attention. She studied Lila with the dispassionate interest of a scientist examining a specimen, and when she spoke, her voice carried across the clearing despite the dying storm. Lila Chen, age 28. Turned 3 years ago, but never properly registered with the council. Each word was precise, factual. First documented shift occurred approximately 1 hour ago during combat with feral rogues. Preliminary reports suggest unusual power levels and combat instincts. Preliminary reports? Lila stepped forward, ignoring Cade's warning squeeze on her hand. Who exactly has been reporting on me? A ghost of a smile touched Thorne's lips. We monitor all supernatural activity, Miss Chen. When a wolf displays the kind of raw power you demonstrated tonight, it creates ripples. Ripples in the supernatural ecosystem. Power calls to power, and yours is significant enough to attract attention from entities far more dangerous than rogues. Thorne began walking toward them, her boots silent on the muddy ground. Which is why immediate evaluation is necessary. And if I refuse? Then you become a rogue yourself, unregistered, uncontrolled, and therefore a threat to be eliminated. The casual delivery of the death threat made Lila's vision flash red for a moment. Beside her, Cade tensed like a loaded weapon, but she squeezed his hand in warning. Violence would only prove their point. What does this evaluation involve? She asked instead. 3 tests: control, loyalty, and power. Thorne stopped about 10 feet away, close enough to be conversational, but far enough to avoid being threatening. Standard protocol for all wolves displaying alpha potential. And if I pass, you'll be offered placement within an established pack structure with appropriate oversight and training. Thorne's pale eyes flicked to Cade. Lone wolves are not permitted to train alphas. Too much risk of independent thinking. The insult was subtle but unmistakable. Cade's response was a low growl that made several enforcers shift their stances. I don't want to join a pack, Lila said clearly. I want to stay with Cade. What you want is irrelevant. What matters is what's best for supernatural society as a whole. Thorne gestured to one of her enforcers, who stepped forward carrying a sleek metal case. Shall we begin? The case opened to reveal 3 objects that made Lila's blood run cold. A silver collar etched with symbols she didn't recognize. A vial of dark liquid that seemed to absorb light. And a crystal sphere that pulsed with an inner radiance that hurt to look at directly. The first test, Thorne explained, lifting the collar, measures your ability to submit to authority. Silver inhibits supernatural abilities. Wearing this will demonstrate your willingness to place the pack's needs above your own desires. Lila stared at the collar, understanding instinctively that putting it on would be a form of surrender that went far deeper than simple compliance. It would be accepting their right to control her, to define her worth, to decide her fate. No, she said quietly. I beg your pardon? I said no. Lila's voice grew stronger. I won't wear a collar for anyone. Murmurs ran through the assembled wolves. Even Marcus looked surprised by her defiance. But Thorne's expression didn't change. Perhaps you misunderstand the consequences of refusal, the counselor said. This is not a request, and this is not compliance. Lila took another step forward, feeling Cade's pride radiating through their connection. I've spent the last 3 years of my life being told what to do, what to think, how to feel. I won't start again just because you have silver and threats. Interesting. Thorn set the collar aside and picked up the vial. Perhaps we should proceed to the second test. This contains concentrated rogue essence, the distilled madness of wolves who've lost their humanity. Drinking it will show us whether you can resist corruption when faced with pure chaos. The liquid in the vial seemed to writhe as if alive, and looking at it made something deep in Lila's mind recoil in instinctive horror. Whatever that substance was, it was fundamentally wrong, an affront to everything natural and healthy. That's poison, she said, in a sense. But it's also a test of mental fortitude. Strong wolves can resist its effects. Weak ones. Thorn shrugged. Well, we find out quickly. You want me to poison myself to prove I'm strong enough not to be poisoned by something else? I want you to demonstrate that you can face corruption without succumbing to it. Lila looked around the clearing, taking in the faces watching her. The enforcers remained impassive, but she could see calculation in their eyes. Assessments of threat levels, escape routes, kill zones. Marcus looked troubled, as if he hadn't expected things to go this far. Elna appeared conflicted, torn between duty and conscience. But it was Cade's expression that decided her. He wasn't looking at her with expectation or demand. He was looking at her with absolute faith in whatever choice she made. There's a third option, she said, turning back to Thorn. Which is? I could demonstrate my power in a way that doesn't require submission or self-harm. Lila felt something wild and fierce rising in her chest, the same energy that had driven her transformation during the rogue attack. You want to see what I'm capable of? Fine. But we do it on my terms. For the first time, genuine interest flickered in Thorn's pale eyes. Go on. Single combat. Me against your best enforcer. No weapons, no tricks, no poisons. Just strength against strength. Lila's voice carried across the clearing, and she saw several wolves straighten in surprise. If I win, you leave me alone. If you lose, you submit to council authority, Thorn finished. Permanently. The word hung in the air like a blade. Permanent submission meant more than just joining a pack. It meant becoming property of the council, to be deployed and disposed of as they saw fit. Lila, no, Cade said urgently. You don't understand what you're agreeing to. I understand perfectly. She turned to face him, letting him see the certainty in her eyes. I understand that I'm tired of being afraid, tired of running, tired of letting other people decide what my life is worth. This isn't the way. It's my way. She reached up to touch his face, feeling the tremor in his jaw. Trust me. For a long moment, they stared at each other. Then Cade nodded slowly, though she could feel his terror through their connection. I accept, Thorn said, before he could protest further. Marcus, your best fighter against mine. Winner takes all. Wait. Marcus stepped forward. She's not part of my pack. I have no authority to agree to terms on her behalf. Marcus and his pack lingered a moment longer. You're making a mistake, Lila, he said finally. The council was your best option for protection and training. The council wanted to collar me like a dog, she replied. You wanted to claim me, like property. At least Cade wants me to be myself. Marcus's expression tightened. And when being yourself gets you killed? When the rogues come back, or worse things follow the scent of power you're radiating? What then? Then we'll face it, together. She squeezed Cade's hand, feeling his strength flow into her through their connection. The way mates should. The word hung in the air between them, carrying implications that made several of the assembled wolves draw sharp breaths. Claiming someone as a mate was the deepest bond possible between their kind. Deeper than pack loyalty, stronger than any law. Mates, Marcus repeated, his voice flat with disbelief. "You've known him for hours." "I've known him forever," Lila corrected. "I just didn't understand what I was waiting for until now." Elena stepped forward, her expression thoughtful. "The Guardians would still welcome you both. Our offer stands." "No," Cade said firmly. "We appreciate it, but we're done with organizations and hierarchies. We want to build something different." "What will you do?" Elena asked. "Where will you go?" Lila looked around the clearing one last time, taking in the faces of wolves who represented different paths she might have taken. Marcus with his offers of pack protection and traditional power, Elena with her promise of purpose and service to a greater cause, Thorn with her demand for submission to established order, all of them missing the point entirely. "We're going to live," she said simply. "We're going to love each other, protect what's ours, and build a life that makes us happy. We're going to prove that strength doesn't require dominance, that power doesn't require submission, and that the best pack is the one you choose for yourself." One by one, the other wolves began to disperse. Marcus left first, his expression unreadable. Elena lingered longer, studying them with professional interest before finally nodding and leading her companions back into the forest. Soon, Lila and Cade were alone in the clearing, standing amid the remnants of a confrontation that had changed everything. "No regrets?" Cade asked quietly. Lila considered the question seriously. She'd given up the protection of pack membership, the resources of the council, the structure and belonging that came with traditional supernatural society. She was now classified as a rogue, prey to any hunter who wanted to test themselves against her power. But she was free to choose her own path, to define her own worth, to love without permission or apology. "None," she said firmly. "What, about you? Ready to be mated to the most wanted wolf in North America?" Cade's laugh was rich and warm, and completely unworried. "Love, I've been ready for that since the moment you refused to leave me bleeding in the forest." He kissed her then, soft and deep and full of promise, and as their lips met, Lila felt something shift in the air around them. A recognition, a completion, a bond that went deeper than blood or law or tradition. They were mates, partners, a pack of two against whatever the world might throw at them. And for the first time in her life, Lila Chen felt like she was exactly where she belonged. But as they walked back toward the cabin, hands intertwined and hearts full of new possibilities, neither of them noticed the figure watching from the distant tree line. A figure who'd observed the entire confrontation with calculating interest and was now reaching for a satellite phone with a smile that promised nothing but trouble. Some hunts, after all, were just beginning. Chapter 8. The Alpha awakens. Victor moved like lightning, closing the distance between them in the span of a heartbeat. His fist cut through the air where Lila's head had been, but she was already flowing away from the strike, her body responding, with reflexes she'd never trained. The crowd around the clearing was dead silent, their attention focused with the intensity of predators watching a kill, but Lila tuned them out, letting her enhanced senses expand outward until she could track Victor's movements by the displacement of air, the subtle shift in his scent that preceded each attack. He was fast, brutally efficient, and he fought like someone who'd killed more opponents than he could count, but he fought like a human. Lila let her wolf rise to the surface without fully shifting, feeling her strength multiply as supernatural power flooded her muscles. When Victor's next punch came, she caught his wrist in her hand and held it there, watching surprise flicker across his professional mask. "You're holding back," she said quietly, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden stillness. Victor's response was to drive his knee toward her ribs with enough force to shatter bone. Lila twisted, taking the impact on her hip instead, and used his momentum to throw him across the clearing. He hit the ground hard but rolled to his feet with practiced grace. "Better," she said, and this time she was the one who attacked. fight that followed was unlike anything Lila had ever experienced. Every movement felt choreographed by instincts older than thought, her body flowing between offense and defense with a fluidity that seemed to surprise even her. Victor was skilled, experienced, ruthless, but he was also predictable in the way that came from years of structured training. Lila had no structure, no formal technique. What she had was pure, unfettered power, guided by instincts that whispered strategies in her ear like ancient secrets. She feinted left, then spun right, her claws raking across Victor's shoulder. He responded with a backhand that would have decapitated a normal human, but she ducked under it and drove her fist into his solar plexus hard enough to lift him off his feet. Impossible, she heard someone whisper from the crowd. She's toying with him. Was she? Lila paused to consider this, studying Victor as he struggled to regain his breath. She could end this fight whenever she wanted. She could feel that certainty singing in her bones. The question was whether she wanted to prove her point through dominance or through mercy. Victor settled the question for her by pulling a silver knife from somewhere in his tactical gear. The crowd erupted in protests. Even Counselor Thorne stepped forward, her pale eyes flashing with what might have been anger. This was to be unarmed combat, she said coldly. Tell that to him, Lila replied, never taking her eyes off Victor's blade. Silver would burn her, slow her healing, potentially kill her if it found the right spot. Though I have to say I'm disappointed. Is this really the best the council can offer? Victor's face flushed with rage at the insult. He came at her again, the knife weaving patterns in the air that spoke of military training and years of practice. But anger made him sloppy, and sloppiness was something Lila's instincts knew how to exploit. She waited until he committed to a thrust aimed at her heart, then moved. Not away from the blade, but toward it, inside his guard where the knife couldn't reach her. Her hand closed around his throat, and for a moment they stood frozen in a tableau of dominance and submission. Yield, she said quietly, her claws pricking the skin over his carotid artery. Victor's eyes burned with humiliation, but he was professional enough to recognize defeat when it had him by the throat. I yield. Lila released him and stepped back, ignoring the knife that clattered to the ground. Around the clearing, absolute silence reigned. Even the dying storm seemed to have paused to witness what had just occurred. She had defeated Victor without breaking a sweat, without even fully shifting, without using a fraction of the power she could feel coiled in her muscles like compressed lightning. Well, Counselor Thorne said into the silence, that was illuminating. Was it? Lila turned to face the woman who'd come to test her, and saw something new in those pale eyes. Not respect exactly, but recognition. The acknowledgement of an apex predator by another apex predator. Because from where I stand, it looks like your evaluation process is fundamentally flawed. How so? You're testing for submission? For the ability to follow orders and fit into existing power structures? Lila gestured to Victor, who was retrieving his gear with wounded dignity. But that's not what strength is. Real strength is knowing when to fight and when to yield, when to lead and when to follow. Real strength is making your own choices. Thorne studied her for a long moment. And what choice are you making now? I'm choosing to walk away from this entire system. The words came out with a certainty that surprised even Lila. I don't want to join your council. I don't want to submit to pack authority. I don't want to be tested or evaluated or registered like some kind of supernatural weapon. That's not how this works, Marcus interjected. You can't just opt out of supernatural society. Can I? Lila looked around the clearing, taking in the faces of every wolf present. Who's going to stop me? Victor couldn't. The council's tests couldn't. What exactly gives any of you the right to force me into compliance? The law, Thorne said quietly. Centuries of tradition. The need to maintain order. Your order, your traditions, your laws. Lila shook her head. I never agreed to any of it. You became part of it the moment you returned. No, I became part of something bigger than your political games. Lila looked at Cade, saw him watching her with an expression of fierce pride and absolute faith. I became part of something that matters more than fear-based hierarchies and submission rituals. And what's that? Thorne's voice carried genuine curiosity now. Love, choice, the right to define my own worth. Lila took Cade's hand, feeling the warmth of his skin anchor her to what was real and true. The right to choose my own pack. A pack of two is not sustainable, Elena said from the edge of the clearing. You'll be isolated, vulnerable. We'll be free, Cade said, speaking for the first time since the fight began. Free to live by our own rules, to protect what matters to us, to build something better than what you're offering. Thorne was quiet for a long moment, her pale eyes moving between Lila and Cade with calculating intensity. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of absolute authority. The council recognizes your choice, she said formally. You are hereby declared rogue wolves, outside the protection and jurisdiction of supernatural law. Any actions taken against you will not be considered council business. The pronouncement should have been terrifying. Instead, Lila felt nothing but relief. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Being rogue means you're on your own against everything that hunts in the dark. And there are things out there far worse than council enforcers. Thorne gestured to her team, who began packing their equipment with efficient precision. When you realize you've made a mistake, the offer to join proper pack structure will remain open. For a time. We won't be back, Lila said with quiet certainty. Famous last words. Thorne's smile was cold, but not entirely unkind. Victor, stand down. We're leaving. The enforcer looked like he wanted to protest, but discipline won out over wounded pride. Within minutes, the council team had melted back into the forest with the same silent efficiency they'd displayed on arrival. Done, Cade said immediately. Second, everyone fights when Haven is threatened. No exceptions, no conscientious objectors, no matter what species is doing the attacking. Understood, Lila agreed. Third, and this is the big one, no reproduction. Without community approval, Haven can only support so many residents, and babies mean long-term commitment to the community's survival. The last condition made Lila's chest tighten unexpectedly. She and Cade hadn't discussed children, hadn't even considered what their future might look like beyond escaping immediate threats. But the idea of needing permission to start a family felt uncomfortably like the council's attempts to control her choices. That's, she began. Practical, Marge said firmly. Haven exists because everyone puts the community's survival above their individual desires. It's not about control. It's about making sure there are enough resources to go around and enough fighters to protect what you've built. How many people live there? Cade asked. About 300 last count. Roughly half shifters, quarter vampires, quarter everything else. Marge finished her coffee and stood. They've been watching the situation here, by the way. Your little display with the council enforcer has already reached Haven's leadership. And they're impressed. Powerful lone wolves who can handle themselves in a fight, but aren't interested in conquest. That's exactly what they need. Marge moved toward the door, then paused. But they're also cautious. You'd have to prove yourselves before being accepted as permanent residents. How? Lila asked. Marge's smile held a hint of mischief. By surviving the journey there. Word is already spreading about your location, and the routes north aren't exactly safe for traveling wolves. Consider it a field test. With that ominous statement, she headed for the door. Marge, Lila called after her. Why are you helping us? The older woman paused, her expression softening. Because 40 years ago, I was a young witch running from a coven that wanted to use my power for things I couldn't stomach. A rogue wolf named James Morrison found me bleeding in a forest and carried me to safety. Lila felt Cade go rigid beside her. Morrison. Your grandfather, Marge said gently. He saved my life, helped me find my place in the world. This is me, paying that debt forward. She was gone before either of them could respond, leaving them alone with the weight of that revelation and the decision that lay before them. Your grandfather helped her, Lila said finally. He helped a lot of people. Cade's voice was thick with emotion. It's why he was cast out of his original pack. He kept interfering in supernatural politics, helping refugees and rogues instead of maintaining proper boundaries. Sounds like it runs in the family. Apparently. He pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. What do you think about Haven? Lila considered the question seriously. They could stay here, try to build a life in isolation, constantly looking over their shoulders for the next threat. Or they could risk the journey north, toward a community that might offer them something they'd never had. A place where they could belong without compromising who they were. I think, she said slowly, that I'm tired of running from things. Maybe it's time to run toward something instead. Cade's arms tightened around her. Together, always together. Outside, storm clouds were gathering again, and Lila could smell rain on the wind. But for the first time since her world had turned upside down, she wasn't afraid of the weather. They had each other. They had a destination. And they had the kind of love that could weather any storm. All they had to do was survive the journey. As if summoned by her thoughts, a howl echoed from the forest, distant but unmistakably hostile. It was answered by another, then another, until the morning air filled with the sounds of a pack on the hunt. So much for a peaceful breakfast, Cade muttered, already moving toward his clothes. Lila smiled, feeling her wolf stir eagerly in response to the challenge. When have we ever done peaceful? The hunt was coming to them. Good. It was time to show the supernatural world exactly what a mated pair of rogue wolves could do. Chapter 9. Dawn of a New Pack. 3. Days later, Lila woke to the sound of rain pattering softly against the cabin windows and the warmth of Cade's arm around her waist. For a moment, she lay still, savoring the simple pleasure of belonging somewhere, not just in a place, but with a person who saw her exactly as she was and loved her for it. The mating bond had settled into something deeper than she'd expected. It wasn't just emotional or physical, though both aspects left her breathless. It was a constant awareness of Cade's presence, even when he was out of sight. She could feel his contentment as he dozed beside her, could sense the steady rhythm of his heartbeat like an echo of her own. Good morning, he murmured against her neck, his voice rough with sleep. Is it good? She asked, stretching languidly in his arms. No council enforcers on the porch? No pack challenges? No mysterious figures lurking in the forest? His arms tightened around her. No mysterious figures that I can detect, though I've been thinking about that. Lila turned in his embrace, studying, his face in the gray morning light. Over the past 3 days, she'd learned to read the subtle signs of his moods, the way his eyes darkened when he was worried, the slight tension in his jaw when he was holding something back. What kind of thinking? She asked. The kind that involves us not staying in one place too long. He sat up, running a hand through his dark hair. Being declared rogue protects us from council interference, but it also makes us fair game for anyone else who wants to test themselves against us. Like bounty hunters? Among other things. Cade moved to the window, his naked form silhouetted against the pale light. There are supernatural communities that exist outside council jurisdiction, Some of them peaceful, some not. Lila joined him at the window, pressing against his side and taking comfort in his solid warmth. The forest stretched out before them, seemingly peaceful in the morning mist. But she'd learned to look deeper now, to trust the instincts that whispered, warnings about things her human eyes couldn't see. "You're talking about the figure we didn't see," she said. "Among other things," he repeated. "Our scent signature changed when we mated. Other wolves will be able to track us more easily now, and word travels fast in supernatural circles. You're saying we need to disappear. I'm saying we need to be strategic about where we build our life." He turned to face her, golden eyes serious. "There are places where rogue wolves can live safely, if they're strong enough to claim territory, and smart enough to avoid unnecessary conflicts." Lila considered this, feeling a flutter of excitement beneath her concern. The idea of exploring the hidden supernatural world, of finding their own place within it, appealed to something wild and adventurous in her nature. "Where did you have in mind?" Before he could answer, a new scent drifted through the cabin, something familiar but out of place. Lila's enhanced senses identified it immediately: coffee, bacon, and the particular combination of soap and perfume that could only belong to one person. "Marge," she called, moving toward the main room. The diner waitress was standing in the kitchen, fully dressed despite the early hour, calmly making breakfast as if she had every right to be there. She looked up when Lila appeared, taking in her disheveled appearance and Cade's protective stance behind her with the knowing smile of someone who'd seen it all. "Morning, honey," Marge said cheerfully. "Hope you don't mind me letting myself in. Figured you two might be hungry after all the excitement." "How did you—" Lila began, then stopped as her enhanced senses provided more information. Beneath the human sense of coffee and soap was something else, something that made her newly awakened wolf instincts sit up and take notice. "You're not human," she said quietly. "Guilty as charged." Marge flipped the bacon with practiced ease. "Though I have to say, you figured that out faster than most. Usually takes new wolves weeks to develop that kind of scent discrimination." Cade had gone very still behind Lila, and she could feel his tension through their bond. "What are you?" he asked. "Witch," Marge replied matter-of-factly. "Kitchen witch, specifically, which is why I own a diner instead of brewing love potions in some spooky forest cottage." She gestured toward the table with her spatula. "Sit, eat. We have things to discuss, such as—" Lila remained standing, though the smell of the food was making her stomach growl. Shifting apparently burned a lot of calories, such as the fact that half the supernatural underworld is buzzing about the new rogue pair who told the council where to shove their authority. Marge plated the food with efficient movements, and the fact that some very unsavory characters are already making plans to test that authority. "What kind of characters?" Cade asked, moving to flank Lila protectively. "The kind that eat lone wolves for breakfast and use their bones to pick their teeth." Marge's tone remained cheerful, but her eyes were serious. "Vampire covens looking to expand their territory. Fae courts testing the boundaries of the old. Treaties. Demon cults who think powerful rogue wolves make excellent sacrifices." The casual recitation of threats made Lila's blood run cold. "You're saying we've painted targets on our backs. Honey, you painted targets on your backs the moment you walked away from that councilwoman. The question is what you plan to do about it." Lila and Cade exchanged glances. They'd known that going rogue would have consequences, but they'd been thinking in terms of pack politics and territorial disputes. The idea of vampires and demons hunting them had never entered the equation. "What do you suggest?" Lila asked, finally accepting Marge's implicit invitation and sitting at the table. "You need allies. Specifically, you need allies who exist outside the traditional supernatural power structures." Marge poured coffee with steady hands. "Lucky. For you, I know just the place." "Which is? Ever heard of Haven?" When they both shook their heads, Marge smiled. It's a town about 200 miles north of here. Founded by supernatural refugees about 50 years ago. Vampires who didn't want to be part of the Blood Wars. Witches who refused to bow to the High Covens. Shifters who rejected pack hierarchy. A rogue town, Cade said thoughtfully. More than that, it's a sanctuary. Neutral ground where different species can coexist without the politics and power games that define most supernatural communities. Marge's expression grew serious. But it's not a place for the weak. Everyone who lives there has to contribute to the common defense, and that defense gets tested regularly. By whom? Everyone who thinks a town full of rogues and refugees is an easy target. Marge sipped her coffee. Which is why they need people like you. Powerful enough to make a difference, principled enough not to try to take over. Lila felt Cade's interest through their bond, tinged with caution. The idea of a supernatural sanctuary appealed to both of them, but they'd learned to be suspicious of offers that seemed too good to be true. What's the catch? Lila asked. No catch, but there are conditions. Marge held up one finger. First, what happens in Haven stays in Haven. No outside allegiances, no reporting back to councils or covens or any other governing body. Chapter 10. Trial by Hunt. The pack hunting them wasn't rogues. Lila could tell that immediately from the coordinated nature of their howls. This was an organized assault, probably mercenaries hired by someone who wanted to test the rumors about the powerful new rogue pair. 8 wolves, Cade said, his enhanced hearing picking up details she was still learning to process. Coming from 3 directions. Professional formation. Lila felt her wolf rise in response to the threat, power flooding her system until her skin felt too small to contain it. But beneath the surge of adrenaline was something new, a calm certainty that came from fighting beside someone who would never abandon her. Bounty hunters? She asked, pulling on clothes with efficient movements. Most likely. There are always wolves willing to hunt their own kind for the right price. Cade's expression was grim as he checked the cabin's defenses. The question is, who's paying them? Through their bond, Lila felt his tactical thinking, exits, sight lines, potential ambush points. 3 days of mating had created more than emotional intimacy. They were beginning to fight as a single unit, each anticipating the other's movements. Does it matter who hired them? She asked, moving to the window that offered the best view of the approaching forest. They're here to kill us either way. It matters because it tells us what we're really up against. Random bounty hunters are one thing. A coordinated campaign to eliminate rogue wolves is something else entirely. The first attacker broke from the tree line as he spoke, a massive gray wolf moving with the controlled aggression of a professional soldier. Behind him, the forest seemed to shift and flow as more shapes materialized from the shadows. They're not trying to be subtle, Lila observed. Why would they? 8 against 2, trained fighters against newly mated rogues. Cade's smile was sharp and entirely without humor. They think this will be easy. The gray wolf approached the cabin door with confident strides, clearly intending to announce terms or demand surrender. Lila could see the arrogance in his posture, the assumption that 2 rogue wolves would be easily intimidated by superior numbers. His first mistake. Lila was through the window before the wolf could react, shifting mid-leap so that her human form became a golden brown missile of claws and fury. She hit him at full speed, driving him backward into the muddy clearing, her momentum carrying them both into a rolling tangle of violence. Behind her, she heard glass breaking as Cade followed her through a different window, his darker wolf form, intercepting 2 attackers who'd been trying to flank them. The gray wolf under her was strong, experienced, and completely unprepared for the ferocity of her assault. She was smaller than him, but speed and anger made up for the size difference. Her claws raked across his throat before he could properly defend himself, and his surprised yelp was cut short by the wet sound of tearing flesh. Left side. Cade's voice whispered in her mind, and she spun without thinking to catch another attacker mid-pounce. The mental connection between them was seamless now, allowing them to coordinate their movements without spoken words. "Got him," she responded, driving her claws into the second wolf's ribs. "How many more?" "5. 2 coming around the back. 3 holding position at the tree line." The tactical assessment flowed between them as naturally as breath. Lila had never experienced anything like it. The absolute trust of fighting beside someone who knew her capabilities and limitations, who would cover her weaknesses while amplifying her strengths. A third wolf tried to blindside her while she was finishing the second. But Cade was there instantly, his jaws closing around the attacker's neck with devastating precision. The crack of breaking bone echoed across the clearing. "They're regrouping," Lila observed, watching the remaining 5 wolves fall back to reassess their strategy. "This isn't going how they planned." "No, they expected easy targets." Cade's mental voice carried grim satisfaction. "Instead, they found us." The lead wolf, a scarred female with the bearing of a pack enforcer, shifted to human form and called across the clearing. "Enough. We're here to make an offer, not start a war." "Funny way of making an offer," Lila replied, not bothering to shift back. Her wolf form felt more natural in combat, more honest about her intentions. "We had to test your capabilities first." Our employer wanted to know if the rumors were true. And Cade padded to Lila's side, presenting a united front. "They're true." The female wolf's eyes flicked to her fallen packmates with professional assessment rather than grief. "You killed 3 experienced fighters in less than 2 minutes. That's impressive." "It's efficient," Lila corrected. "What's this offer?" "Our employer would like to meet with you, discuss possible employment opportunities for wolves of your particular talents." Lila felt Cade's amusement through their bond. The idea that someone thought they could be hired after sending assassins to test them spoke to a staggering level of arrogance. "Employment doing what?" Cade asked. "Eliminating problems. Specifically, supernatural problems that resist conventional solutions." The woman's smile was cold. "There's good money in it, and the work comes with protection from both council interference and other bounty hunters." "Protection," Lila repeated, "from the same people who just tried to kill us." "Business is business. We were paid to test you, not necessarily to eliminate you. Though I admit, most targets don't survive the testing phase." The casual admission made Lila's vision flash red. These wolves killed for money, without conscience or consideration for the lives they destroyed. They represented everything she'd come to despise about supernatural politics: power without responsibility, strength without honor. "Counteroffer," she said, taking a step forward. "Which is?" "You and your remaining packmates leave our territory immediately. You tell your employer that we're not interested in their job opportunities, their protection, or their money. And you spread the word that any future hunting parties sent against us won't be offered the chance to surrender." The woman's expression hardened. "That's not very diplomatic." "I'm not feeling diplomatic." Lila let her wolf's predatory nature show in her stance, her scent, the way she held her head. "I'm feeling territorial. And right now, you're trespassing on territory that 3 of your packmates died trying to claim." For a moment, the clearing was silent except for the sound of rain beginning to fall. The remaining wolves shifted nervously, clearly recognizing that their tactical advantage had evaporated, along with their fallen packmates. "You're making enemies," the woman warned. "We're making a statement," Cade corrected. "The statement is that rogue wolves aren't easy prey. Pass that along to whoever hired you." The enforcer studied them for another long moment, then gestured to her remaining packmates. "We'll deliver your message. But this won't be the last hunting. Party sent against you." "We know," Lila said quietly. "We're counting on it." The surviving wolves melted back into the forest with the same professional efficiency they'd shown in their approach. leaving Lila and Cade alone in the clearing with 3 corpses and the growing certainty that their problems were just beginning. "Well," Cade said, shifting back to human form. "That went about as well as expected. Better, actually." Lila joined him in human form, though she kept her enhanced senses extended for signs of additional threats. "We learned that someone specific is targeting us, not just random bounty hunters looking for easy money." "True. The question is whether it's connected to the Council's declaration that we're rogues, or something else entirely." Lila considered this as they walked back toward the cabin. The attack had been too organized, too well funded to be a simple bounty hunt. Someone with resources and connections had specifically wanted them tested, which meant someone was planning for them to survive the encounter. "You're thinking what I'm thinking," Cade said, reading her expression. "That this was a job interview." She nodded grimly. "They wanted to see what we could do in combat, how we worked together, whether we were worth recruiting. Which means they'll be back, with better offers, bigger threats, or both." The realization settled over them like a cold. Wait, they'd wanted freedom from supernatural politics, but their very existence as powerful rogue wolves made that impossible. There would always be someone trying to use them, control them, or eliminate them as a threat. "Haven's looking better by the minute," Lila said. "Agreed. How soon can you be ready to travel?" She looked back at the cabin that had become their first real home together, where they'd discovered the depths of their connection and learned to fight as a mated pair. Leaving felt like abandoning something precious, but staying felt like signing their death warrants. 20 minutes, she said firmly. "We take what we can carry and leave the rest." Cade's arms came around her from behind, and she leaned into his warmth and strength. "Any regrets about choosing the rogue life?" Lila thought about the question. Seriously. 3 days ago, she'd been a runaway trauma nurse with no idea what she really was. Now she was a mated werewolf with blood on her hands and enemies closing in from all sides. She should be terrified. She should be mourning the simple human life she'd lost. Instead, she felt more alive than she ever had. "None," she said, turning, in his arms to kiss him fiercely. "Though I'm starting to think we should have asked Marge for directions to Haven." "I know the way," he said against her lips. "My grandfather mentioned it once, years ago. Said it was a place where wolves could be themselves without apology. Sounds perfect. It will be. As long as we can get there alive." Outside, thunder rumbled across the mountains, and new scents began to drift on the wind. Scents that spoke of different predators, different threats, different hunts beginning in the darkness between the trees. Their enemies weren't done with them yet. But then again, they weren't done fighting either. 20 minutes later, they were running north through the forest, side by side in wolf form, carrying everything they owned in packs secured to their backs. Behind them, smoke rose from the cabin they'd set ablaze to deny it to anyone who might try to use it as a base for hunting them. Ahead lay 200 miles of dangerous territory, filled with predators who would see them as either prey or threats, to be eliminated. And beyond that, if they were strong enough and lucky enough to survive the journey, lay the promise of a place where they could build a life worth living. Together, they ran toward whatever future awaited them, their howls harmonizing, in a song of defiance that echoed across the mountains long after they'd disappeared into the storm. "Smart girl, I like that." The woman finished her drink and stood. "I want safe passage through Haven when I get there. Vouched for by a mated pair powerful enough to make the Guardians nervous." "You're going to Haven too?" "Eventually. But I'm in no hurry to deal with the gauntlet they make travelers run." She extended a hand that felt like touching starlight. "Seraphina. And before you ask, yes, that kind of angel. The fallen kind." "Angel. Fallen angel." Lila's mind reeled as she shook. hands with a being that belonged in mythology textbooks, not mountain town bars. "Lila, this is Cade, and yes, we can vouch for you in Haven." "Excellent." Seraphina's smile turned genuine. "Meet me behind the inn in 20 minutes, and bring whatever weapons you have. The tunnels don't just hide you from surface threats." She was gone before they could ask what she meant by that, leaving them alone with the weight of another impossible decision. "Fallen angel," Cade said quietly. "Just when I thought this night couldn't get any stranger. She's offering us a way past the Guardians. That's worth the risk." "Is it? We don't know anything about her, her motivations, or what she's really running from." Lila considered this, then looked toward the window where she could still see the Guardians maintaining their watch. "We know she wants the same thing we do, safe passage to Haven, and right now, she's the only option that doesn't involve surrendering to Elena's people, or fighting our way through half the supernatural underworld." Cade was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "Underground it is, though I have a feeling we're going to regret this." "Maybe, but at least we'll regret it together." His hand found hers across the small table, warm and steady and absolutely certain. Always together. Outside, storm clouds were gathering again, and Lila could smell rain on the wind. But for the first time in days, she wasn't worried about the weather. They had each other. They had an ally, however mysterious, and they had a path forward that didn't involve surrender or compromise. All they had to do was survive whatever lived. In the tunnels beneath the mountains, how hard could it be? As if in answer to her thought, something howled in the distance. Not a wolf this time, but something older and hungrier and completely unnatural. The sound made every supernatural being in the bar fall silent for a moment, listening to echoes that seemed to come from deep underground. On second thought, Cade murmured, "Maybe we should have taken our chances with the Guardians." But it was too late for second thoughts. Seraphina was waiting for them in the alley behind the inn, her form wreathed in shadows that moved independently of the wind. In her hand was a map drawn on what looked like human skin, and her smile promised nothing but trouble. "Ready for an adventure?" she asked. Lila looked at Cade, saw her own determination reflected in his golden eyes, and nodded. "Lead the way." Though tunnels beckoned, dark and full of secrets, and somewhere in that darkness, their future was waiting. Chapter 11. The Long Road. Home. By the third day of running, Lila understood why most wolves traveled in packs. The territory between their former cabin and Haven was a patchwork of competing claims. Vampire covens, fey courts, witch circles, and various pack territories that shifted like the weather. Navigating it required constant vigilance, the ability to read territorial markers that ranged from subtle to deadly, and the kind of supernatural stamina that came from being perfectly in tune with your wolf form. Fortunately, 3 days of constant travel had taught them to move as a single unit. Where Cade's experience read the political landscape, Lila's instincts detected immediate threats. Where her enhanced senses picked up approaching danger, his tactical knowledge found them routes around it. They'd avoided 2 vampire hunting parties, skirted the edge of what felt like fey territory, and put serious distance between themselves and whoever might be tracking them from the south. But they'd also burned through most of their supplies and pushed their bodies to the limits of supernatural endurance. "We need to stop," Lila said, as they crested a ridge that offered their first clear view in hours. Below them, a valley stretched toward the horizon, dotted with the lights of what looked like a small town. Agreed. Cade shifted to human form beside her, consulting the hand-drawn map Marge had slipped into their supplies. This should be Cedar Falls. Neutral territory, supposedly. Supposedly? It's a border town. Technically neutral, but everyone who lives there has allegiances somewhere. He studied the valley with the careful attention of someone who'd learned not to trust appearances. "We should be able to find food and shelter for the night. but we'll need to be careful about who we trust." Lila nodded, too tired to argue. Her wolf form could run for days without stopping, but maintaining the heightened alertness necessary for traveling through hostile territory was exhausting. She needed real sleep, real food, and a few hours where she didn't have to be ready for violence at any moment. "Together?" she asked, the question carrying more weight than just their approach to the town. "Always." They made their way down the ridge as the sun set behind them, painting the valley in shades of gold and crimson. The town below looked peaceful enough. A main street lined with businesses, residential areas spreading outward in neat patterns, the kind of place that could exist anywhere in rural America. But as they drew closer, Lila's enhanced senses began, picking up details that marked Cedar Falls as anything but normal. The scents were too varied, too complex, wolf and vampire and something else she couldn't identify. The sounds carried undertones of languages that predated English by centuries. And there was a quality to the shadows that suggested they might contain more than empty air. "Supernatural hub," Cade confirmed quietly. "This is where different species come to do business with each other." "Legal business? Define legal." The main street bustled with activity despite the late hour. Lila caught glimpses of figures that moved with inhuman grace, eyes that reflected light like mirrors, conversations conducted in whispers that still somehow carried clearly in the night air. A supernatural market, she realized, neutral ground where enemies could trade without violence. "The inn," Cade said, pointing to a building that looked like it had been standing since the town's founding. Neutral ground within neutral ground. No violence allowed inside, no questions asked about what brought you here. The Crossroads Inn lived up to its name. The common room buzzed with conversations in at least 6 different languages, and Lila could identify wolf, vampire, and fey scents among the patrons. At a corner table, 2 figures in expensive suits discussed something that involved frequent references to territories and blood rights. Near the bar, a woman whose pale skin seemed to glow in the lamplight negotiated what sounded like a weapons deal with someone whose voice carried the harmonics of barely contained power. "Friends of yours?" the desk clerk asked when they approached, to request a room. He was human, but the way he looked at them suggested he knew exactly what they were. "We're just passing through," Lila replied. "Course you are. That'll be $200 for the night, paid in advance. No parties, no fighting, no shifting inside the building." He slid an old-fashioned key across the desk. "Dining room serves until midnight. Bars open all night. Try not to start any wars while you're here." Their room was on the 2nd floor, small but clean, with windows that offered a view of the town's main thoroughfare. Lila collapsed onto the bed with a groan of relief, feeling muscles she'd forgotten she had protest the sudden stillness. "Shower first," Cade said, though he looked as exhausted as she felt. "Then food. Then we plan the rest of the route to Haven." The shower was a luxury she hadn't realized she'd missed. 3 days of running through forests, sleeping rough, and living off whatever small game they could catch had left her feeling like she'd been ground down to her essential elements. The hot water was a reminder that comfort still existed in the world. When she emerged, she found Cade standing by the window, his expression troubled. "What is it?" she asked, moving to join him. "Look at the street." 3rd building down, across from the general store. Lila followed his gaze and saw them immediately. 2 figures in the kind of tactical gear that screamed military training, positioned with clear sightlines of the inn's entrance. As she watched, a 3rd figure joined them, and she caught a glimpse of familiar auburn hair. "Elena," she breathed, "and friends. They've been tracking us." "Guardians?" "Has to be. The question is whether they're here to recruit us or eliminate us." Cade's jaw tightened. "Either way, they know where we're going." Lila felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. If the Guardians could track them this easily, how many other groups were doing the same? How many hunters, recruiters, and enemies were converging on their route to Haven? "We can't stay here," she said. "No, but we can't leave until we know how many of them there are and what their intentions are. Cade moved away from the window. I'm going down to the bar. See what I can learn from the locals. I'm coming with you. Lila. We agreed. Together. She pulled on clean clothes with quick, efficient movements. Besides, you need backup if this goes bad. His expression softened. You're right, but we play this carefully. Information gathering. Only. The bar was thick with smoke and conversation when they entered, the kind of controlled chaos that came from putting natural enemies in the same room and expecting them to behave. Lila could feel the weight of attention as they found seats at the bar, the subtle assessments that marked them as new players in whatever games were being conducted here. What'll it be? The bartender asked. He was vampire, Lila realized. Something about the way he moved, the careful control of his breathing. Information, Cade said quietly. About the Guardians who just rode into town. The bartender's expression didn't change, but she saw his hands still for just a moment. Don't know what you're talking about. 3 operatives, military gear watching the inn. Cade slid a gold coin across the bar. Payment in the universal currency of supernatural deals. I'm not asking for their mission parameters, just whether they're here for us or someone else. For a moment, the vampire studied them with ancient eyes. Then the coin disappeared into his pocket. Word is they're tracking a rogue pair that caused some trouble down south. Powerful wolves who told the council where to stick their authority. His smile revealed just a hint of fang. Story goes they're either recruiting material or elimination targets, depending on how cooperative they prove to be. And which do you think they are? Lila asked. Honey, in my experience, the Guardians don't make that distinction until after they've got you somewhere private. The bartender moved to serve another customer, leaving them with that ominous assessment. So much for recruitment, Cade muttered. Maybe. Or maybe they want to test us the same way the bounty hunters did. Lila studied their reflection in the mirror behind the bar, noting how they looked together. Dangerous, unified, uncompromising. Either way, we're not going with them willingly. Agreed. Which means we need another way out of town. There is another way. The voice came from the woman sitting 2 stools down from them, the one whose pale skin had seemed to glow in the lamplight. Up close, Lila could see that the glow was literal, a soft radiance that spoke of power barely contained beneath human-seeming flesh. Which is? Cade asked carefully. The old mining tunnels. They run for miles under these mountains, come out about 50 miles north of here. The woman's smile was sharp and knowing. Of course, they're not exactly safe. Things live down there that don't appreciate visitors. What kind of things? The kind that used to be human before they went looking for gold in places that weren't. Meant to be disturbed. She raised her glass in a mock toast. But hey, at least they're probably less dangerous than the Guardians. Lila felt Cade's interest through their bond, tinged with caution. Underground tunnels would hide their scent, mask their direction of travel, and potentially allow them to bypass whatever net was being drawn around them. But they'd also be traveling blind through territory inhabited by creatures that scared, a being powerful enough to glow. What do you want in exchange for directions? She asked. Have they? Or have they simply been occupying land that was never legally transferred? Aurelius's mental voice carried dark amusement. Pack law is very specific about territorial inheritance, young Morrison. When your grandfather was exiled, his territorial claims were never formally revoked by the council. They simply overlooked them. What are you saying? I'm saying you have a legal claim to several thousand acres of prime mountain territory, and that claiming it would give you something the council, the Guardians, and every bounty hunter in North America would have to respect. A power base, Lila breathed, understanding immediately. Exactly. Territory means resources, defensive advantages, and most importantly, legitimacy. The Shadowmere Pack may have been using the land, but they have no legal right to it if the Morrison bloodline reclaims its inheritance. The possibility hung in the air between them like a challenge. Instead of running to Haven as supplicants, they could claim their own territory, build their own sanctuary, create something that belonged entirely to them, but it would mean fighting for it. The Shadowmere Pack won't give up 30 years of occupation without a war, Cade pointed out. No, Aurelius agreed. They won't. But you defeated council enforcers and professional bounty hunters with contemptuous ease. What makes you think a pack of territory squatters will prove more challenging? Lila looked at Cade, saw the war between hope and fear playing out across his features. This was bigger than anything they'd considered, more dangerous than any choice they'd made. It was also exactly what they needed. When? She asked. Now. Tonight. Before word spreads further and the Shadowmere Pack has time to call for reinforcements. Aurelius lifted his great head, and his mental voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. Strike fast, strike hard, and make it clear that the Morrison bloodline has returned to claim what was always theirs. And if we fail, then you die as wolves instead of living as prey. But you won't fail. The dragon's confidence was absolute. You are what your species was meant to be. Powerful, united, uncompromising. It's time the supernatural world remembered why wolves were once the apex predators of this continent. Cade's hand found hers in the darkness, warm and steady and utterly certain. Together? He asked. Always together, she replied. And in the depths of an ancient dragon's hoard, surrounded by treasures that predated human civilization, Lila Chen made the choice that would define the rest of her life. They weren't running to Haven anymore. They were going home, to claim what was theirs, and to show the supernatural world exactly what happened when you threatened a mated pair of wolves who had finally stopped being afraid. The war for their future was about to begin. Chapter 12. Into the heart of the mountain. The entrance to the mining tunnels lay hidden behind an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Cedar Falls, marked only by a rusted gate that looked like it hadn't been opened in decades. Seraphina produced a key from somewhere in her coat, a key that glowed with the same soft radiance as her skin. "Last chance to reconsider," she said, though her tone suggested she already knew their answer. Lila looked back toward the town, where the Guardians were undoubtedly still watching and waiting. Then she looked at Cade, saw the same determination in his eyes that she felt in her own chest. "We go forward," she said simply. "Then welcome to the underworld," Seraphina replied, turning the key with a sound like distant thunder. The tunnels beyond the gate were older than Lila had expected, not the rough-hewn passages of desperate miners, but something carved with purpose and precision. The walls were smooth stone marked with symbols that seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at them, and the air carried scents that spoke of deep earth and old magic. "These weren't made for mining," Cade observed, his voice echoing, strangely in the confined space. "No," Seraphina agreed, her form providing their only light source in the absolute darkness. The mining was just what humans told themselves they were doing when they found the passages. Truth is, these tunnels are older than any human settlement in North America. "How much older?" Lila asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Old enough that the things living down here remember when the surface world was very different. Seraphina's smile was sharp in her ethereal glow. "Try not to wake anything up." They walked in single file, Seraphina leading, Lila in the middle, Cade bringing up the rear. The tunnel sloped steadily downward, branching occasionally into passages that disappeared into darkness so complete it seemed solid. Each junction was marked with more of the shifting symbols, and Seraphina navigated them with the confidence of someone who'd made this journey before. "How do you know the way?" Lila asked, after they'd been walking for what felt like hours. "I've used these tunnels before. When I fell, I landed somewhere in these mountains. Took me months to find my way to the surface. There was something in Serafina's voice that discouraged further questions. Let's just say I'm familiar with the local geography. The temperature had been dropping steadily as they descended, but now Lila noticed something else. A rhythmic sound, barely at the edge of hearing. Like breathing, but too deep and too slow to belong to anything human-sized. Please tell me that's just the wind, she whispered. That's just the wind, Serafina said cheerfully. Of course, I'd be lying. But you did ask me to tell you that. Behind her, Cade's tension was a palpable thing. Through their bond, she could feel his enhanced senses reaching out, trying to identify the source of the sound. What he found there made his mental voice tight with concern. Something big, really big. And it's between us and the exit. How big? Dragon big. The word hit Lila like a physical blow. Dragons were supposed to be extinct, wiped out centuries ago by coordinated supernatural efforts. The idea that one might be living beneath these mountains was both terrifying and impossible. Serafina, she said carefully. What exactly lives down here? Oh, the usual. Ghouls, wraiths, things that used to be miners before they dug too deep and found something that changed them. The fallen angel paused at another junction, consulting symbols that glowed faintly in response to her presence. And yes, before you ask, there's a dragon. But he's usually asleep, and we're going to be very quiet and respectful as we pass through his territory. Usually asleep? Cade's voice carried the particular edge that meant he was calculating combat odds and not liking the results. Dragons need a lot of rest. Maintaining that much mass and magical power is exhausting. Serafina started down the left-hand passage. Besides, Aurelius is old enough to be tired of fighting unless someone really annoys him. Aurelius, Lila repeated. The dragon has a name. Of course he has a name. He's not some mindless beast. Serafina's tone suggested this should be obvious. He's older than Rome, more educated than most universities, and has a very sophisticated sense of territorial respect. As long as we're just passing through, he won't bother us. And if we're not just passing through, then we become part of his treasure hoard, but in a very permanent way. The breathing sound was getting louder now, accompanied by what might have been the whisper of scales against stone. The tunnel had widened into something that could generously be called a cavern, though the darkness beyond Serafina's glow made it impossible to judge the true size. Stay close, she whispered. And whatever you do, don't touch anything that looks valuable. Dragons are very particular about their possessions. They crept forward into the vast space, and gradually Lila began to make out shapes in the darkness. Piles of gold coins that caught and reflected Serafina's light, jeweled weapons arranged with museum-quality care, artifacts that radiated power even from a distance. And in the center of it all, a shape so massive that Lila's mind initially refused to process it as a living creature. Aurelius was easily 100 feet long, his scales dark as midnight but shot through with veins of gold that pulsed with each breath. His head was larger than most cars, resting on front paws that could have crushed buildings. Even asleep, he radiated an aura of ancient power that made Lila's wolf instincts cower, in submission. Beautiful, she thought, unable to help herself. One enormous eye opened, regarding her with intelligence that predated human civilization. Yes, a voice whispered in her mind, dry as desert wind and infinitely amused. I am rather magnificent, aren't I? Lila froze, realizing that the dragon was not only awake, but actively reading her thoughts. Beside her, she felt Cade's shock through their bond, and ahead of them, Serafina had gone very still. Serafina, the dragon's mental voice continued, and now there was fond exasperation in it. Still bringing strays through my home, I see. Hello, Aurelius, the fallen angel said aloud. We're just passing through. No harm intended. I know. The question is whether your companions understand the rules of hospitality. The dragon's gaze shifted to Cade, then back to Lila. Mated wolves. How charming. And powerful enough to interest the council, I gather. You know about that? Lila found her voice, though it came out smaller than she'd intended. Child, I know about everything that happens in my territory, including the Guardian Patrol that's been tracking you and the bounty hunters who tested your capabilities. Aurelius shifted slightly, coins cascading from his side like a metallic waterfall. You've caused quite a stir in supernatural circles. We just want to be left alone, Cade said, his voice carefully respectful. Of course you do. Young love always wants to exist in isolation, protected from the harsh realities of the world. The dragon's mental laugh was like distant thunder. But you are too powerful for isolation, too visible for anonymity. Your very existence will draw attention whether you wish it or not. That's why we're going to Haven, Lila said, to find a place where we can build a life without constantly fighting for the right to exist. Haven. Aurelius considered this. Yes, that might work, assuming you survive the journey and prove worthy of their protection. You know about Haven? I helped establish it, child. 50 years ago, when the supernatural wars were tearing the continent apart, a group of refugees approached me for advice. I suggested they find a place where strength mattered more than politics, where contribution trumped heritage. His great head lifted slightly. It has served them well. Lila felt a surge of hope. If Aurelius had helped create Haven, if he believed it could offer them sanctuary, but, the dragon continued, and her hope withered, you will not reach it by running through my tunnels. The Guardians are not the only ones tracking you, and the route to Haven is being watched by forces that make the Council seem benevolent. What do you mean? Seraphina asked, her ethereal glow flickering with tension. I mean that someone has put a bounty on this mated pair that has attracted attention from the worst elements of supernatural society. Vampire covens, demon cults, fey courts that see them as potential weapons or threats to be eliminated. Aurelius's mental voice grew serious. The tunnels will not protect them from what is coming. Then what do you suggest? Cade asked. The dragon was quiet for a long moment, his ancient eyes studying them with an intensity that felt like being dissected by starlight. I suggest you stop running, he said finally. Stop hiding. Stop apologizing for your power and start using it. Use it how? By making a statement so clear, so definitive, that every supernatural being in North America understands exactly what it means to threaten you. Aurelius's smile revealed, teeth like crystalline daggers. By going home. Home. Lila's voice cracked on the word. We don't have a home. We burned the cabin. Not that home. Your real home. The place where this all started. The dragon's gaze shifted to Cade. Your grandfather's territory. The pack lands your family was driven from decades ago. Cade went rigid. That territory belongs to the Shadowmere pack now. They've held it for 30 years.